Chapter 592. How dare you? Princess Hui's face turned red. She pointed at Li Yi and said, "How dare you twist right and wrong at will? This matter should be reported to His Majesty and let His Majesty decide." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "His Majesty is unwell and has already gone back to rest. The Secret Intelligence Office can handle such a small matter. I won't disturb His Majesty." Princess Hui snorted coldly and said, "Then keep him temporarily and wait for His Majesty's decision." Concubine Chui glanced at Princess Hui thoughtfully. "His Majesty and Her Majesty have arrived." At this moment, a eunuch's sharp and thin voice came from outside the door. "Greetings to His Majesty and Her Majesty." A group of women's voices suddenly sounded in the hall. Their voices were clear and melodious. Emperor Jing slowly walked in from outside the door with Her Majesty beside him and Princess Royal on the other side. When he walked into the hall and saw Li Yi and Li Xian, he was slightly stunned and asked, "Why are you two here?" Then he saw the Imperial Guards in the hall and asked again, "What happened here?" The leader of the Imperial Guards immediately stepped forward and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, just now, Her Majesty walked aside and talked to Prince Consort." Mingzu came over and looked at Li Yi. She lowered her voice and asked, "Did you cause trouble again?" Li Yi glanced at her. Did he look like a troublemaker? It was always trouble that provoked him. After hearing the words of the leader of the Imperial Guards, Emperor Jing's face darkened slightly. He looked back at Changde, who shook his head and said, "Impossible. How could a Grandmaster Realm expert be knocked into by a maid and have something fall out of his sleeve? Even if it really fell out, it could be retrieved before the other party could react. There was no need to even think about it." The problem lay with the maid. In the eyes of all the women in the hall, His Majesty was the most impartial and selfless. No matter if County Earl Li's wife really stole or if the palace maid framed her, everything would come to light after His Majesty showed up. Under their gazes, the fair and impartial His Majesty walked in front of the maidservant and asked lightly, "Who ordered you to do this?" Princess Consort Hui's expression froze. Noble Consort Chui glanced at Emperor Jing, and the rest of the women also looked incredulous. Your Majesty." The maid's entire body was trembling, and even her voice was trembling. "I will ask you again. Who ordered you to do this?" The maid's face was ashen, and her whole body was shaking like a sieve. "Drag him out. Flog him 50 times before questioning him," Emperor Jing said faintly. The leader of the Imperial Guards obeyed the order and 2 Imperial Guards carried the maid out. Not long after, a miserable scream came from outside. "Your Majesty, this..." Imperial concubine Chui walked out and pointed outside. She wanted to say something but hesitated. "I know what to do," Emperor Jing said. He glanced at Li Yi and Li Xian and said, "What are you two still doing here? Do you want me to add 2 more seats for you?" Li Yi and Li Xian were driven out by the old emperor before he could say a few words with Rui. He wanted to see what his concubines looked like, but he only saw Imperial concubine Chui. Although she was still charming, her mind was extremely vicious. This matter was most likely ordered by her. Imperial concubine Chui, right? The Chui family, right? These days, he was a little itchy. There was still half a month before the enrollment of the Imperial College. He had plenty of time. Inside the palace, the Princess Royal Highness was surrounded by many women. Rui and the 3rd Miss of the Qin family were talking. The Empress was holding the Crown Princess's hand. No one knew what topic they were talking about, but it made her blush. Imperial concubine Chui sat next to Emperor Jing. She bowed and said, "It's all my fault. I almost ruined my sister's banquet." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "In the future, you have to take good care of the servants around you. Some people are becoming more and more bold." Another concubine next to him nodded and said, I should take good care of the servants in the palace. Recently, a lot of the knight Emingzu that your majesty rewarded have gone missing. Jewelry has also been inexplicably lost. The servants by this concubine's side are rather clean. Imperial concubine Yen smiled. Only her palace had never lost anything. Shaning, that girl, always gave her some knight Emingzu or other jewelry. When the girl grew up, she knew how to be filial to her mother. However, a daughter was a daughter after all. She couldn't compare to Imperial concubine Chen, who gave birth to a good son. Prince Jean was young and intelligent. It was said that County Earl Li asked His Majesty to let Prince Jean be a teacher of the Imperial College. There were even rumors that County Earl Li, who was highly regarded by His Majesty, wanted to support Prince Jean as the emperor. Of course, these things had nothing to do with her. In a few years, her daughter would have a good husband. That was what she was concerned about. Not long after, the leader of the Imperial Guards came in from outside the hall and said, Your Majesty, she confessed. The maid confessed very quickly. If there was no special favor other than the word punishment by flogging, then this punishment by flogging was the standard punishment by flogging. 50 flogging was enough to beat an adult man half to death. As for those who were slightly weaker, they might not even be able to keep their lives. At the 10th flogging, she couldn't help but confess. The leader of the Imperial Guard said, she admitted that she was greedy for the Imperial concubine's bracelet. Originally, she planned to find a place to hide outside the hall, but she accidentally bumped into Lady Li, so she simply pushed all the blame onto Lady Li, this lowly maid. Imperial concubine Cui showed a trace of anger on her face. She waved her hand and said, How dare she do such a bold thing? Someone, drag her away and flog her to death. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, Today is the Lantern Festival. It's not appropriate to kill anyone. Flog her 100 times. If she is still alive, expel her from the palace. Yes, Your Majesty. After the leader of the Imperial Guards responded, he quickly walked out. His Majesty said that today was the Lantern Festival and it was not appropriate to kill anyone. Thus, he couldn't really flog her to death. Although she could avoid the death penalty, she couldn't escape punishment. She stole the Imperial concubine's treasures and framed the county earl's wife. After this 100 flogging, she would most likely lose half of her life. She could only spend the rest of her life in bed. This lowly maid, how dare she? I was almost deceived by her just now. Yes, Madame Li seems to be a good person. She wouldn't do such a thing. The maids couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. His Majesty was really wise. With just a glance, he knew that it was the maid who framed Madame Li. And the County Earl Li, who was in the limelight, had more than just the Emperor's favor. After all, if he was seriously investigated, he was disrespectful to the Imperial concubine and defended Madame Li. However, how could a little maid dare to do such a bold thing? Moreover, she was the personal maid of Imperial concubine Cui. It was unknown whether there was any hidden story behind this matter. Your Majesty, I'm not feeling well. I'll leave first. Imperial concubine Cui stretched out her hand to support her forehead. There was a trace of tiredness in her voice. Emperor Jing looked at her and said, Do you want to summon an imperial doctor? No, I just feel a little tired. I'll be fine after a short rest. Imperial concubine Cui shook her head slightly and said. Emperor Jing nodded. Imperial concubine Cui, followed by 2 maids, walked out of the hall. As soon as she stepped out of the hall, Princess Hui, who had a strong unwillingness on her face, also followed her out. There were many palaces in Hibiscus Garden. Important concubines such as the Empress, Imperial concubine, and concubine Yen all had their own palaces. At this time, in a palace somewhere, Imperial concubine Cui stood with her back facing the hall. Her face was cold, and she didn't look tired at all. Princess Hui came in from outside and said with a little anger in her voice, "What's the background of Li Yi? Why does he deserve His Majesty's favoritism? He obviously didn't investigate it strictly. Qin might have confessed under torture." Slap. A loud slap suddenly came from the hall. Princess Hui covered her burning face, and her eyes were full of disbelief. "Sister, you, who allowed you to act on your own?" Imperial concubine Cui looked at her with cold eyes and said coldly. Chapter 593. Sister, Princess Hui covered one side of her face, and the other side was extremely pale. She looked away and said in a trembling voice. Imperial concubine Cui said coldly, "Qin grew up in the Cui family and has been with me for more than 10 years. Before that, she took care of your daily life. Who else can order her around except you?" Princess Hui lowered her head and said nothing for a long time. After a while, she suddenly gritted her teeth and a strong hatred appeared on her pale face. She said harshly, "Yes, it's me. I asked Qin to do this. A jade bracelet is nothing. I just want to ruin her reputation. This is just the beginning. They ruined my child. I want them to die a horrible death." "What happened to Li De?" Imperial concubine Cui frowned and asked. After De was flogged, he can no longer have sex." Princess Hui squeezed out a few words from between her teeth. Imperial concubine Cui frowned even more. After a while, she said in a low voice, "Stupid. The king of Shu was expelled from the capital city because of the last incident. He was not summoned to the imperial court this time. Their power in the court was also severely damaged. The Qin family's attitude was unclear, and Prime Minister Qin's party also began to waver. The influence on other officials was deeper. The Cui family and her plot for more than 10 years was almost destroyed. It was impossible for them to recover in a short time. What they could do now was to bear it. Even if their power in the court was severely damaged, they still had no rivals. The Cui family had an extremely strong foundation in the aristocrats of the court and the people. No one, including the emperor, dared to underestimate them. It was simply a fool's dream for other princes to want to touch the East Palace. If they could maintain the original situation, they would win. But if they continued like before, they would be pushed into the abyss step by step. Imperial concubine Cui looked at her and said coldly, "This matter will come to an end. 1 year, at most 1 year. No matter who Li Yi is, you can do whatever you want to him. If he does such a stupid thing again and spoils my son's plan, don't blame me for being ruthless." When he said the last sentence, his tone was extremely harsh. "I got it." Princess Hui nodded, gritted her teeth and said, but the hatred in her eyes was still so strong that it could not be dispersed. "Royal Prince Duanyang can no longer have sex." Li Yi was very shocked when he heard the news from Li Xian. Wasn't it supposed to be a wooden board? He was going to be beaten on his stomach, not lying down. How could he be injured? Where was he injured? Could it be that the blood capillaries were clogged due to fear, causing the blood vessels to be blocked and the peripheral nerves to die off, causing the cavernous body to die off? It's already spread among the nobles in the capital. Don't you know? Li Xian looked at him and asked. Li Yi shook his head. He had never known what the circle of the rich and powerful in the capital was like. Moreover, he had been staying at home to look after the child or accompany Rui for the past few months. He had no time to care about other people's business. It said that Prince Hui and Princess Consort Hui invited many skilled doctors, and even a few imperial physicians, but none of them were able to cure Royal Prince Duanyang. Li Xian sighed. For a man, this was already the greatest shame of his life. So pitiful. Although he couldn't empathize with them, they were both men. Even if royal Prince Duanyang was a good-for-nothing, he was still pitiful in this matter. Li Yi also sighed and said, "Yeah, everything is fine now. It's all because of God's sin." Li Xian turned to look at him with a helpless expression on his face. "Don't you know who the culprit is?" Thinking of something, Li Yi looked at Li Xian and asked, "By the way, is that auntie just now Princess Consort Hui?" Li Xian nodded and said, "Yes, she is Princess Consort Hui, Royal Consort Chui's twin sister and Royal Prince Duanyang's mother. 2 sisters, one is a royal consort and the other is a princess. Is the Chui family really so powerful?" Li Yi asked again. Li Xian nodded and said, "In the entire Jing kingdom, the Chui family is considered one of the most influential families. It has been around for at least hundreds of years, and its influence is even greater. Except for the royal family, there are only a few families that can compete with the Chui family." Li Yi had learned about these families and the royal family before, but he didn't know as much as Li Xian did. More than 100 years ago, the aristocratic families were so powerful that even the royal family had to give way to them. Although they were not as prosperous as they were at that time, their foundation was still there. Without a proper reason, even the royal family couldn't afford to offend them. Of course, this didn't mean that the royal family couldn't touch them. It was just that those aristocratic families were too deeply rooted and had a great influence in the court and among the people. Even if the current emperor had always wanted to weaken the power of the aristocratic families, he had to take into account the stability of the people and couldn't take tough measures. Moreover, the relationship between aristocratic families and between aristocratic families and the royal family was also very complicated. There were many concubines in the palace, and almost every one of them had a certain power behind them. Royal consort Chui represented the Chui family. Even the empress had a powerful family behind her that was not weaker than the Chui family. Concubine Yan, concubine Chen, the concubines of various kings, and even Li Xian's own concubines, the entanglement of interests in this was not something that could be explained in a few simple words. The more he said, the more confused Li Yi felt. He shook his head and asked again, "The Chui family almost monopolized the jewelry business, so they must be very profitable. Compared with your father-in-law's family, which family is richer?" In the entire Jing kingdom, except for the royal family, no family is richer than the Wang family. However, for ordinary people, the wealth of the Chui family is still unimaginable. Li Yi nodded and said, "Then let's do it." "What for?" Li Xian raised his head and asked curiously. "Cheers." Li Yi raised the teacup in his hand and said. In the Jade Palace, an imperial guard soon brought the news that the bracelet was stolen by the maid of royal consort Chui. After the matter was exposed, she deliberately framed Countess Li and was severely punished by His Majesty. She was flogged 100 times. Her life was spared, but her ending was still miserable. Li Yi was not surprised at all. Just now, Princess Hui had been trying to expose the matter to the old emperor, but she did not know that it was simply courting death. It was not good to frame anyone, but to frame Rui. He wanted to ask Chang whether he had the ability to do so. The old emperor was suffering from asthma, not senile dementia. He was the one who had gotten himself into this mess. However, this piece of news was rather thought-provoking to others. A little maid stole the treasure of the royal consort and framed Countess Li. She must have eaten a bear's heart and a leopard's heart to dare to do so. The king of Shu had once offended Countess Li and was almost beaten to death in front of hundreds of officials. But now, he could still live freely in Hibiscus Garden. Where was the king of Shu? The eldest son of the emperor, the prince most likely to enter the East Palace, was now banished to Shuzhou to herd sheep. The officials of the king of Shu's faction avoided him as if he was the plague. How could they provoke him at such a critical moment? Could it be that royal consort Chui was really out of her mind? Everyone could clearly see the current situation in the imperial court. The college was about to open, and Countess Li was highly valued by His Majesty. He was in high spirits and no one in the imperial court could steal his edge. The King of Shu's faction had just suffered a heavy blow. Now it was best to keep a low profile and wait for the right time. It was really stupid to provoke the other party at such a critical moment. Chapter 594. The lights in Hibiscus Garden were still the same, and the lake was full of lanterns. As the breeze blew, the water sparkled and crushed the shadows of the lanterns in the lake. What happened in Ingsue Garden was just a small interlude. Less than an hour later, people came out of the hall one after another. The officials and nobles found their families either strolling in the garden at night or accompanying them home. As they walked along the corridor on the water, the Shitsi face said to Rui, "Lu Jijia, if you run into my husband later, please tell him that I will stay behind to accompany the Empress tonight. He can go back by himself." Rui nodded. The Crown Princess smiled and turned to walk back into the hall. He usually stays at home and likes to cook. He likes to make some strange things. Rui and Third Miss Chen walked side by side and said something with a smile. The two of them are very different. Third Miss Chen shook her head and said softly. Rui naturally knew who the two people she was talking about were, but she didn't want to continue this topic. "Hey, isn't this Third Miss Chen?" A strange voice suddenly came from the front. Princess Hui, who had just left the hall, suddenly appeared there. She looked a little strange. She looked at Third Miss Chen and said, "I heard that Li family's Li Minghan came back some time ago. You didn't wait in vain for the past 20 years. Hearing this, Third Miss Chen's body trembled. She clenched her fists in her sleeves and her face turned slightly pale. Many women who passed by on the corridor paused and frowned slightly when they heard this. Third Miss Chen was a sentimental person. Her matter was not a secret in the circle of the nobles in the capital city. Everyone knew that her hair turned white overnight because of Li Minghan. If they talked to her on normal days, they would avoid talking about that topic. What Princess Hui said just now was indeed a little too much. It was impossible that she didn't know that Li Minghan had passed away. At this moment, she said these words on purpose to make Third Miss Chen sad. However, Chen family, Chui family, and Hui Wang, weren't they always on the same boat? Princess Hui smiled and said, "Oh, I forgot. Li Minghan died a long time ago. It's good that he died. What's the point of living in this world for such a heartless person? But I seem to have heard that Li Minghan's son looks exactly like him. As the saying goes, the son pays his father's debts." "Shut up." A light reprimand suddenly sounded. Princess Hui was slightly startled. When she looked at the woman beside Third Miss Chen, the anger that she had suppressed with great difficulty rose again. She said angrily, "How dare you? Who are you?" She had wanted to use her status to pressure her, but when she saw the woman's eyes, she felt her tongue stiffen, and she couldn't say what she wanted to say. Apart from that, there seemed to be something pressing down on her, causing her breathing to stagnate. Even opening her mouth became extremely difficult. "Let's go." Rui smiled and turned to speak to Third Miss Chen. She took a step forward, but Princess Consort Hui staggered a few steps back and bumped into the railing of the corridor. The maid beside her didn't have time to help her and saw Princess Consort Hui fall down head first. Although it was not the center of the lake, the water was not shallow. Princess Hui flopped a few times on the water, and then there was no sound. The maid was so scared that her soul almost left her body. She screamed, "Help! Help! Help! Princess has fallen into the water." Not far away, a group of imperial guards rushed over. When they came to the front, they immediately jumped down without hesitation. Princess Hui was soon rescued, but she fainted because of excessive shock. Seeing this scene, the woman was frightened. Recalling the scene just now, she couldn't come to her senses for a long time. Madame Li clearly didn't do anything. She just took a step forward, and Princess Hui stepped back several steps until she fell into the lake. Why did this scene look so familiar? After a while, they remembered that King of Shu was so scared by County Uncle Li's murderous eyes that he jumped into the lake. When they looked at Mrs. Li again, they couldn't help but be frightened. When they walked forward again, the crowd retreated. Third Miss Chen didn't say anything along the way. After walking out of the long corridor on the lake, Li Yi and Li Xian were waiting not far away. You go first. I'll wait for them. Third Miss Chen said and stood there waiting for the woman of the Qin family. Ru Yi glanced ahead and didn't say anything. After saying goodbye to her, she walked straight ahead. Did concubine Cui do anything to you just now? Li Yi asked Rui in the carriage after leaving Furong Garden. Rui shook her head and said, what could she do to me? She helped Li Yi adjust his collar and said with a smile, my husband, you forgot that I'm very powerful. No, I still can't take this lying down. Although what happened tonight didn't affect Rui much, courtesy demanded reciprocity since ancient times was a traditional virtue. Traditional virtues couldn't be lost. How could one only accept gifts and not give them? I'm fine. My husband, don't act recklessly. Rui looked at him and said in a low voice. Li Yi shook his head and said, as a county uncle, of course, I have to set an example and abide by the law. How can I act recklessly? After a quarter of an hour, the carriage couldn't go any further. Tonight, several main streets in the capital were full of traffic. It was difficult for carriages and horses to move. Li Yi and Rui got out of the carriage. In the sky behind them, fireworks rose and exploded. The first night of the Lantern Festival had passed. According to the situation in previous years, the residual heat of the Lantern Festival would probably last for 2 or 3 days. After the Lantern Festival, the New Year's festival was finally over. For the ordinary people in the capital, life returned to peace and it was time for another busy year. However, for the officials in the imperial court, the word peace had nothing to do with them. No matter when, there were countless undercurrents surging in the imperial court. A little carelessness would cause one to be involved and be doomed eternally. Last night in the hibiscus garden, the wife of County Uncle Li was framed by the personal maid of concubine Cui. This was one of the undercurrents, which was regarded by everyone as some kind of action of concubine Cui. After all, everyone knew that County Uncle Li and the King of Shu were completely on the opposite side. The more he was valued by the emperor, the worse it was for the King of Shu. In front of so many people, Princess Hui was surprised by Third Miss Chen's sarcastic remarks, which made many people puzzled. The Qin family was the closest ally of the King of Shu and was also on the same path as Prince Hui. If the two families hadn't fallen out, how could Princess Hui say such words in public? They didn't know when it started, but they gradually began to understand these things. But there was one thing that everyone was very clear about. That was, the faction of the King of Shu, which was once powerful enough to control the imperial court, seemed to be gradually declining. Early in the morning, at the gate of the Qin family, a young man came forward and handed over an invitation, saying, please send a message that Prince Duanyang is here to visit old Marquis Qin. The gatekeeper of the Qin family looked at the young man a few more times and thought, why did Prince Duanyang come at this moment? The second master is angry and probably won't be nice to him. However, Prince Duanyang was different from others. No matter what, he had to bring him in first. The servant of the Qin family invited Prince Duanyang in, and a middle-aged man came out. Who is this? Chen Chang's expression was somewhat ugly as he asked coldly. The servant hurriedly said, second master, this is Prince Duanyang. His mother was reprimanded by concubine Cui last night and ordered him to come to the Qin family's mansion early this morning to admit his mistake. Knowing that the person in front of him was the second master of the Qin family, Prince Duanyang immediately cupped his hands and said, I am Li De. Before he could finish his words, he felt a sharp pain in his chest and was kicked out of the door. Prince Duanyang covered his chest with his face twisted in pain. He raised his head and looked at the middle-aged man in front of him with a look of disbelief. Get lost. Chen Chang's face was gloomy and his eyes flashed with killing intent. He spat out a word coldly. Chapter 595. In the hibiscus garden on the night of the Upper Lantern Festival, Consort Hui reopened the scar in third Miss Chen's heart in front of many people. The next day, second Master Chen broke two of Prince Duanyang's ribs with a kick. The two most reliable allies of the King of Shu turned against each other. Countless people sighed in their hearts. They were getting more and more confused by the world. The Qin and Chui families were almost on the same side. Prince Hui and Chui were also on the same side. In this way, the Qin and Prince Hui could only wear the same pair of pants. The relationship between the two families was known by all the officials and nobles in the capital city. But why did the two families stab each other in the back recently? No one knew what happened to Prince Duanyang after his two ribs were broken. It was Consort Chui who would have a headache because of this. Consort Chui must have had a lot of headaches these days. Li Yi had not left his house for 2 days. The academy was about to open and the old emperor placed great importance on it. No matter what, he had to pretend that he was seriously preparing for it and that he would not hesitate to risk his life for the good of the country. Moreover, he didn't go out for 2 days because he was doing something more important. But now, he was leaning against the door and watching the show. Fong was driven out of the house by his wife with a broom. His wife put her hands on her waist and scolded him for being a wastrel. The cause of this incident was when old Fong went to fight for the hero ranking. In the end, he could not control his strength and ended up seriously injuring the elite ranked on the heaven ranking list whom he challenged. He had to pay dozens of taels of silver for his medical expenses, and old Fong's wife was worried about the money. Hence, this scene happened. Wastrel, don't come back to sleep tonight. His wife scolded angrily and went home. Fong walked over dejectedly and squatted down beside Li Yi with a depressed face. Li Yi looked down at him and said, "Don't pretend. Don't go back to sleep tonight. You want it to be like this, don't you?" Lao Fong raised his head and said righteously, "Young master, what you said is wrong. When have I ever slept in the Jade courtyard at night? Here comes work." Li Yi glanced at him and walked into the mansion. "There's a job." Fong stood up abruptly with an excited look on his face. He immediately chased after the man. Less than an hour later, he walked out with half a green cucumber in his hand. He took a bite of it and muttered to himself in a low voice. "What are you doing with these things? Burning bricks? I don't think there are any plans to build any houses." He looked up and saw his wife standing at the door. She looked at him coldly and said, "What are you waiting for? Come back." "I'm coming." Fong sighed, and a disappointed expression appeared on his face. He shook his head, put the booklet in his bosom, and walked back with his head lowered. Back then, the Math Academy had enrolled a total of 100 students. Now, the total number of students was about 120. Getting in through the back door was common everywhere. Since the old emperor couldn't reject them, Li Yi couldn't just shut them out. There were still a few people who were forced into the academy like the little bastard. Fortunately, there were not many of them, and it was within the range that Li Yi could accept. Otherwise, if someone voluntarily dropped out, it would be hard for him to explain to the old emperor. The class schedule of the Math Academy was very scientific. There were 5 days in class and 2 days off, and 1 month in the winter and summer vacations. Classes were held from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., and from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. There were also breaks between classes. There were no self-study sessions at night. It was very humane. Learning mathematics for 8 hours a day was actually very painful. However, it was a piece of cake for the students who could read the 4 books and 5 classics for a lifetime. This kind of high-intensity knowledge instilling could cultivate a batch of useful mathematics talents for the Jin Kingdom in a short period of time. Whether it was the schedule, the content of the classes, or even the timetable, they were all very scientific. The doctoral students from the Math Academy agreed with this. The Math Academy had been separated from the Math Academy. Currently, the doctoral students from the Math Academy were temporarily under Li Yi's command. They were the first to come into contact with the new mathematics, so their starting point was much higher than the students from the Math Academy. As teaching assistants, they would listen to the lectures and assist the doctoral students in teaching. A doctoral student from the Math Academy held the timetable in his hand. He looked up at Li Yi and asked curiously, "Sir Dean, aren't you going to teach the students?" There was something wrong with the timetable in his hand. Why wasn't the most important dean's name on it? Li Yi glanced at him and said, "The dean's responsibility is to provide strategic support for the mathematics school in the general direction and to oversee the overall situation. If he has to do something as trivial as teaching, then what's the point of having teachers like you?" Another doctoral student next to him glared at the fellow who had just spoken and said with a smile, "Sir Dean, you're right. We'll definitely remember your teachings in the future and live up to His Majesty's expectations. We'll cultivate top-notch mathematics talents for the Jin Kingdom." In the end, there were still subordinates who could understand his good intentions. Li Yi nodded and said, "His Majesty isn't here yet. I'll go in and take a nap. Wake me up when His Majesty arrives." The old emperor attached great importance to the Math Academy because it could save him a lot of money. Therefore, on the 2nd day of the 2nd month, which was the opening day of the academy, even though he was ill, he would still bring a few important officials from the imperial court to cut the ribbon and preside over the opening ceremony. At the same time, he would encourage the students so that they would establish a correct outlook on life and study for the rise of the Jin Kingdom. As the dean of the Math Academy, he naturally had a special place. For example, he could have a huge office all by himself. The bed was also very big, so he could sleep, or use it to oversee the overall situation. It was perfect for providing strategic support for the Math Academy. The old emperor came very quickly. Li Yi was woken up not long after he slept. This time, the lineup of leaders for the inspection was very powerful. Prime Minister Qin did not come, but Prime Minister Shen followed the old emperor. The leaders of the 6 ministries came in person, which gave the Math Academy a lot of face. In the sports field behind the academy, Jing Di stood on the rostrum and waved to the students below. He said, "You are all the future pillars of the Jin Kingdom. You may rise." There were many people on the rostrum, including Li Yi. However, when the old emperor was standing, no one dared to sit down. After he finished speaking, Prime Minister Shen went up to speak again. Minister Qin Huan, the Minister of Revenue, rambled on for another half an hour. Li Yi hated this kind of superficial work the most. However, this was the system. He could not do anything about it. He listened until he was drowsy. Naturally, the students of the Math Academy were not drowsy. On the contrary, they could not suppress the excitement in their hearts when they were able to see the emperor and many important officials in the court. Not only that, His Majesty also promised that as long as they could successfully graduate from the Math Academy, they would immediately be able to get a position. What was the purpose of studying hard for more than 10 years? Wasn't it to one day win an official position and bring glory to their family? Taking bribes, bending the law, committing crimes, to repay His Majesty's appreciation of them. The children of the officials did not have much of an opinion about this. After all, they came here to gild their gold. With this qualification, they would be able to rise rapidly in the future and have a carefree future. For the children of poor families, this was the greatest preferential treatment that the emperor had given them. In the crowd below, a 15 or 16-year-old boy secretly raised his head. When he saw a young man on the stage, his face suddenly showed a bitter expression. Chapter 596. Wang Dan, what's wrong? A boy of the same age beside him noticed his abnormality and asked with some doubts. No, nothing. Wang Dan shook his head and said silently in his heart, can't see me, can't see me. A trace of doubt appeared on the face of the boy beside him. When he looked at the stage again, the doubt turned into impatience. He had been talking for more than an hour. This Minister of Revenue was talking too much nonsense. The Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, was a man of few words. Why was he so talkative at this moment? Li Yi didn't know how long he had been listening to Qin Huan. Just as he was about to fall asleep standing up, a doctor beside him nudged him. County Uncle Li, His Majesty is calling you. Li Yi raised his head and rubbed his eyes. He heard Emperor Jing's voice. He turned his head and Emperor Jing was looking at him. As the Dean of the School of Mathematics, what else do you have to say to the students of the School of Mathematics? Watching the young dean walk to the front, more than half of the people immediately showed deep gratitude on their faces. It was the dean's credit that the students from poor families could have such an opportunity. For the sake of the students from poor families, he did not hesitate to offend the nobles in the capital. He just wanted to fight for more places for the students from poor families. In the imperial court, who was willing to do this for the students from poor families? Of course, a few people in the crowd did not look good. For example, Chen Mao, Qin Mao, and Cui Mao looked slightly gloomy. The humiliation on that day had almost made them a joke in the capital. It was not something that could be forgotten in a few months. Li Yi looked down and stretched out his hand to press down. The noise below immediately disappeared. Is everyone here? He turned around and asked one of the mathematics professors. The doctor of mathematics immediately said, in reply to the dean, the 120 students of the School of Mathematics are all here. Since everyone is here, let's take the exam. Li Yi looked at the students below and said, after an hour, gather in the classroom for the entrance exam of the School of Mathematics. Those who do not pass the exam will be disqualified. As the dean, he had nothing to give them, so he would take the exam as a greeting gift. He had thought that the young dean would give a long speech like the others before him, but he had never expected that he would only say 2 short sentences. Before the students could rejoice in their hearts, it immediately turned into astonishment and shock. Those who don't pass the entrance exam will be disqualified. It wasn't easy for him to get into the arithmetic academy and enjoy the country's special allowance. After graduation, he was given the treatment of a civil servant. If he were to be expelled from the arithmetic academy, losing face would be a small matter. But his dream of becoming an official would be shattered. After a short moment of silence, a huge uproar came from below. Jing Di looked at Li Yi with a puzzled expression, obviously waiting for his explanation. Your Majesty, you don't know. Li Yi walked over, looked at Jing Di and said, as early as 3 months ago, the School of Mathematics has already distributed the textbooks they will use for admission. If they are diligent, 3 months is enough to read all the contents of the textbooks. The content involved in this exam can all be found in the textbooks. If in this case, there are still people who do not reach the passing line, it means that they are just lazy people who are destined to not have great achievements. Even if they really enter the court in the future, it will not be a blessing for the court. Li Yi said righteously, the School of Mathematics is indebted to your Majesty, so we have to be responsible to your Majesty and the court. If there are not enough students, we can recruit more, but we must not waste time on these people. Jing Di pondered for a moment and nodded slightly. What you said is reasonable. In this case, I will stay here for a while and see what will happen. Ah. Your Majesty, you want to stay here? Li Yi was stunned. Jing Di looked at him and asked, why? Is there a problem? If the old emperor wanted to stay here, he could not take special care of those difficult candidates. Plan A was temporarily cancelled, and the implementation of Plan B was postponed. No, no. Li Yi shook his head and sighed in his heart. You are so busy with official business, but you still want to waste time here. Don't you know how many memorials you have to read today? The candidates below had already realized that this exam could not be avoided, so they hurriedly walked in the direction of the school's dormitory. There was still an hour before the exam began. They would remember as much as they could. Father. After the students dispersed, Monarch Jin came from the side and walked in front of Jing Di. He looked up and said. Jing Di smiled and touched his head. He said, have you thought about it? Do you really want to be a teacher in this school of mathematics? I have thought about it. Monarch Jin nodded and said, I have grown up. I want to share the burden of father. Jing Di smiled, and his face showed a deep sense of relief. The playful boy had finally grown up. He thought of the street with all kinds of delicious food and strange things next to the school of mathematics. From now on, he did not need to stay in the palace every day. He could go fishing by the river and chase rabbits in the mountains. Li Han's expression became more determined. Father, rest assured. I will be a dutiful teacher. 120 students were divided into 4 exam rooms. Each exam room was supervised by 2 doctors. There were also palace guards at the door and outside the window. Their eyes were like knives, and they patrolled the exam room to prevent anyone from cheating. In the exam room, some people were smiling and high-spirited, while others were sad and dejected. Outside the exam room, Li Yi was showing Jing Di and the others around the school of mathematics. This place was different from the ordinary academies in the Jing kingdom. The classrooms, playground, dormitory, and canteen were all designed by Li Yi himself. The layout was very aesthetic. The green plants on both sides of the road were sprouting, and it was very comfortable to step on the lawn in the middle of the playground. Not bad. Jing Di seemed to have a good impression of this place, and he nodded with satisfaction. In fact, it is still not enough. Li Yi regretfully pointed to the open space not far behind and said, if we can dig an artificial lake in that place, it would be better. The students can walk by the lake, read, and sleep by the lake. It is also comfortable. But the funds are not enough. We still need tens of thousands of taels of silver. Can your majesty, ahem. Jing Di coughed and said, there is no need for an artificial lake. This year, the national treasury is tight, and we need to save unnecessary expenses. Why was it unnecessary? In the summer evening, if the rocking chair was moved to the lake under the tree, the breeze would blow from the lake, and the cicadas would sing. If one was in the mood, they could fish and have a barbecue at night. What a beautiful picture it would be. They could not only think of letting the School of Mathematics export talents for the country. The necessary humanistic care was also indispensable. The old emperor was too poor now. They had to find a way for him to earn some money. When the national treasury was a little full, he would be embarrassed to not pay for the School of Mathematics to dig the lake. Ding! The ringing of the bell meant that the exam was over. All the students walked out of the exam room. Some looked up at the sky, and some looked down at the ground. They did not expect to encounter such a thing on the first day of school. They were really not mentally prepared. For some of them, today was the day they entered the school, and also the day they were kicked out of the School of Mathematics. It was a half-day tour of the school, and they could also pay homage to the emperor and the ministers in the court. It seemed that it was not a loss. Chapter 597. All the test papers were copied and printed a few days ago. Originally, they planned to set aside half a day to mark the papers and wait until tomorrow morning to post the results. However, today the old emperor was in a good mood and the results would be marked and summarized immediately. including Li Yi, the Imperial College's mathematics doctors, mathematics students, and even Prince Jin's little fatty personally marked the papers. It only took a while for all 120 papers to be read. "How is it?" Emperor Jing came over and looked at Li Yi and asked. Li Yi held a list in his hand and said, "Out of the 120 students, 21 are unqualified." Emperor Jing took the list and glanced at it. He frowned and said, "All of them are from aristocratic families." "Yes." Li Yi nodded and said, "In today's exam, there were many students from poor families who got full marks. There was no one who failed." Emperor Jing had been deliberately supporting the children of poor families over the years. He knew that they often worked harder than the children of aristocratic families because of their family circumstances. Although they lacked resources, they frequently performed well in the imperial examinations with their hard work. On the other hand, among the children of the aristocratic families, extravagant and lascivious were prevalent. There were many vermin and they were useless. However, the last time the Calculation Academy enrolled students, it was already biased towards the poor. If these 20 people were expelled, there would be many objections in the court. Moreover, among these people, there was the boy from the Wang family and the nephew of concubine Yan. He had promised them not long ago. If he expelled them on the first day of school, he, as the emperor, would lose face. However, in front of so many people, he had already agreed to Li Yi's request. The emperor had to keep his word, so he couldn't take it back at this moment. "Everyone makes mistakes. Your Majesty, in my opinion, why don't you give them another chance and let them study in the arithmetic college for 3 months? If they are still so lazy after 3 months, they will be kicked out and will never be hired again." Li Yi thought for a moment and looked at Emperor Jing. During the Spring Festival, he visited many of the Li family's relatives. Among the 21 people, he had met several of them. If he was so heartless, it would be hard for him to meet them in the future. As for the little bastard of the Wang family, the business between the two families had just started, so it was not good for him to disrespect the Wang family. In addition, the boy's surname Jing seemed to have some relationship with concubine Yan. He was a proud girl, so it was not good for him to disrespect the Wang family. Of course, he couldn't purposely keep this bunch of disappointing fellows, or else he wouldn't be able to convince the masses. All students should be treated equally. After all, impartiality, fairness, and impartiality were his principles in doing things. It's good to know your mistakes and correct them. Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi with satisfaction, nodded and said, "That's good. Give them a chance, lest they say that the college is not tolerant." "But, Your Majesty, look, Qin Zhong and Chen Hao." Li Yi pointed at the names of the two people and said, "They scored 100 points on the test paper, but they didn't even score 10 points. It's too unreasonable." Qin Zhong, the eldest son of the Qin family's third branch, and Chen Hao, a son of the Qin family's side branch. Emperor Jing glanced at them and said faintly, "Rotten wood cannot be carved. These two people should be expelled directly." Li Yi counted with his fingers. 13 minus 2, there were still more than a dozen. There was still more to come. There was no hurry, there was still a long way to go. However, he could only stop here for today. After all, he had to be fair and just. The results of the entrance examination were posted on a high wall in the arithmetic college. According to a doctor, this wall would be specially used to post examination results. "Congratulations, Brother Wang, for getting full marks. Brother He, don't make fun of me. Aren't you the same? Sigh, it's a pity. Just 1 point. I clearly saw that question yesterday." The students gathered under the wall chatted and laughed. At this time, the results had been posted, and it was clear at a glance whether they passed or not. Most people breathed a sigh of relief, and because of the score, they began to compete with their friends. Of course, this wall was an honor roll for some people, but for others, it was a pillar of shame. Wang Dan stood in the corner, and his face was red. He was so embarrassed that he wished there was a hole on the ground to hide in. These few months, he only cared about playing and flipped a few pages of books at the beginning. 60 points was considered a pass, but he didn't even get half of it. He was afraid that he would be expelled today. He couldn't imagine what kind of reprimand and ridicule he would receive when he returned home. A 15 or 16-year-old youth beside him patted his shoulder and said, "Don't worry, my score is worse than yours. At most, I will be expelled. Who wants to stay in this crappy place? After we leave, we can do whatever we want. No one will care." Wang Dan nodded. If he was expelled, then so be it. At most, he would receive a small punishment and ridicule. In comparison, staying in the arithmetic college and having to face the person he had offended every day was even more terrifying. He even dared to beat up Brother Qin and the King of Shu, let alone himself. For the sake of his life, he had to stay far away from the arithmetic college. At this time, a doctor from the arithmetic college walked over and said, "Anyone who scored more than 60 points in the entrance examination will be considered a pass. Those who pass can leave." Instantly, most of the people started to disperse, but they didn't go too far. They just watched from afar. Those who stayed were naturally those who didn't reach the passing mark. No matter how thick-skinned the 21 of them were, they couldn't hide the shame in their hearts when they were being watched by more than 100 people. These people didn't just include their friends, but also the friends of their elders, the current court officials, the ministers of the 6 ministries, the prime minister, the emperor. Li Yi walked over from afar. These people all had their heads lowered, their faces full of shame. "I have good news for all of you." His gaze swept across the crowd and said, "Those who didn't reach the passing mark in the entrance examination originally didn't have the right to enter. However, His Majesty is benevolent and has decided to give all of you another chance. You can enter the college first. 3 months later, the college will conduct another examination for all of you. If you still don't pass by then, you can pack your things and leave." After hearing this, after a brief moment of shock, everyone was immediately overjoyed. They felt as though they had regained what they had lost. They were already prepared to be reprimanded by their elders when they returned, but they didn't expect to get another chance. 3 months was enough. 3 months was enough. After 3 months, they couldn't let such an embarrassing scene happen again. Among the crowd, the youth named Wang Dan heaved a sigh of relief. Although he didn't want to study mathematics here, he couldn't afford to be chased out on the first day. It's good to know your mistakes and correct them. I hope that you can remember today's lesson and study hard in the future to serve the country. You should know that failure isn't scary. Li Yi looked at them and said in a low voice. A look of shame appeared on the faces of the students, but it was soon followed by a look of gratitude. It turned out that the dean didn't want to chase them away. He wanted to use this opportunity to let them learn a lesson and let them understand that failure wasn't scary. Without failure, how could there be success? Jing Di nodded slightly, and the officials behind him also smiled. This young Dean Li did have some ability when it came to admonishing students. Failure isn't scary, Li Yi said in a low voice. The next moment, his voice suddenly became stern. What's scary is that you still believe this sentence. 3 months ago, the textbooks were already given to all of you. Even if you took an hour out every day, you would still be able to finish reading the contents of the books. You shouldn't have gotten such a score today. In the face of such a score, don't you feel ashamed? Li Yi casually pointed at them and said loudly, all those who didn't pass the examination today, Frog jumped 10 times around the field. The 21 students stood rooted to the ground, their expressions indescribable. Jing Di, who was still nodding, felt his neck stiffen. The smiles on the faces of the officials behind him froze at this moment. Chapter 598. Looking at the dumbfounded crowd, Prince Jean curled his lips and said, "What are you waiting for? Do 10 frog jumps around the playground, not one less. If you can't complete it, pack up your things and go back." Your Highness, what is frog jumping?" One of them finally reacted and asked with a trembling voice. Li Han put his hands behind his back, squatted on the ground and jumped twice. He stood up and said, "Do you see? Just like this, jump 10 laps. This is your punishment." He pointed at a few Imperial guards and said, "You guys come here and supervise them." Failure was really terrible. Although it was very shameful to do such strange movements in public, they weren't the only ones who were shameful. Compared to being expelled from the academy, this was nothing. Under the supervision of the Imperial Guards, the 21 children of the aristocratic family squatted down one by one and started frog jumping around the playground with a sad face. Li Han curled his lips. 1 lap around the playground was more than 100 meters. After they jumped 1 lap, they couldn't even make this kind of expression on their faces. And the most painful thing was not today, but tomorrow when they woke up. Thinking about that feeling, his legs were still weak. However, the feeling of punishing others to do frog jumps was really not bad. What are they doing? A few days ago, I urged Brother Su to read more books, but he refused in every possible way. Brother Su, if it weren't for me, you would be the one squatting there jumping around. How does Brother Su intend to thank me? Tonight, I will invite Brother Zhang for a drink at the Jade Courtyard. Please do me the honor. The students who passed the exam naturally didn't have to be so shameful. They pointed at the people who were doing strange movements and chatted with a smile. Prince Jean looked at Li Yi. Seeing him nod, he walked over with his hands behind his back. Everyone saluted him. Not to mention that he was a prince, just his identity as a teacher of the academy made them automatically ignore his age. Don't be too complacent. Li Han glanced at Li Yi once more before turning back, summoning up his courage to say, "In order for you all to adapt in advance, the academy will arrange some missions for you all. When the time comes, you all might be scattered across the various departments of the Imperial Court, and those who complete the missions will receive corresponding points. There will be a test every half a year, and those who fail will still not be able to successfully graduate from the academy." The students already understood what the word graduation meant. Not being able to graduate from the School of Mathematics meant that the Imperial Court did not recognize one's status as a student of the School of Mathematics. Not only would one not be able to become an official, but they would also be wasting their time. No one wanted to end up like this. Being able to successfully pass 2 examinations meant that they had some confidence in their own strength. If they could really enter the royal court and do some work, it would be a process of accumulating experience for them. There would be no harm in doing so. Minister of Revenue Qin Huan stood beside Li Yi and asked, "Li Darren, what does His Highness Prince Jean mean?" "What I mean is, if you encounter any mathematical problems that you can't solve in the future, you can come to the school to borrow people." Li Yi looked at him and said, "Just don't forget to pay them." Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, "You are now an important minister of the Imperial Court. Don't always stink of money. The students of the academy will still have to work for the Imperial Court in the future. This way, they can improve their resumes. There are many benefits. Why talk about rewards? Thank you for your teachings, Your Majesty. The students of the academy should take the initiative to help the Imperial Court. Money is just a worldly possession." Li Yi looked like he had learned something. He looked at Emperor Jing and said, "I want to ask Your Majesty for some worldly possessions. I want to dig an artificial lake in the academy to build a more comfortable place for the students to study." "I wonder," Emperor Jing's expression froze. He suddenly pointed to the field and said, "What happened to them?" Everyone looked in the direction he pointed and saw that the students who were jumping happily just now were now paralyzed on the ground. It was not until the Imperial Guards forced them to move forward a little bit. Li Han came over and explained, "Father, you don't know this. This action looks simple, but it is very painful to persist for a long time." Emperor Jing nodded and said, "In the end, they will have to enter the imperial court to become an official. For such lazy students, we should punish them and make them change their lazy nature." There was a shortage of mathematics talents in the Jing kingdom. The academy could only train about 100 people in the first batch. No one could be easily given up. After admonishing the mathematicians, Jing Di turned around and asked, "Where were we just now?" Speaking of the artificial lake. Li Yi reminded him. "This Academy of Mathematics, I will leave it to you. Don't let me down." Emperor Jing covered his chest and said, "I am a little tired today. I will return to the palace." "Farewell, Your Majesty." The professors immediately bowed. Nearly 100 students of the Academy of Mathematics lined the road to see them off. Today, they had actually seen the emperor in the flesh. When they returned, they would brag to others. Li Yi's face was full of pity. The stingy old emperor. So many students had done their best for the future of the Jing kingdom, but he could not even satisfy this small request. It was really disappointing. The Academy of Mathematics was very close to the palace. After Emperor Jing walked out of the gate of the Academy of Mathematics, he put his hand down from his chest. His brows relaxed and he said, "The money of the people and nobles in the capital has been earned by them. Now, they have come to ask me for money. The national treasury does not have extra money for them to dig a lake." The Minister of Revenue looked at Emperor Jing and with great difficulty closed his astonished mouth. He opened his mouth again and said, "Yes, the national treasury is tight. It can't withstand any more torment. Return to the palace." Thinking of this, Emperor Jing felt a little annoyed. He waved his hand and stepped onto the dragon carriage. How many laps has it been?" Wang Dan turned his head with difficulty and looked around. Seeing that there were figures crawling with difficulty in front and behind him, he asked weakly. It was only the beginning of February, and it was chilly in spring. His clothes were all soaked in sweat, and his legs were heavy as if they were tied to 2 mountains. Even taking a step forward was very difficult. "There are still 5 laps, an imperial guard behind him said expressionlessly. Thump. Hearing that there were still 5 laps to climb, a sliver of despair rose to Wang Dan's face. The last bit of strength in his body also disappeared. His vision darkened and he fell to the ground. A few steps behind him, the youth surnamed Xing saw Wang Dan fall and also stopped crawling. His entire body lay on the ground and did not move anymore. "Take them to the dormitory." Li Yi waved his hand. It was already difficult for them to run 10 laps around the 400-meter track, let alone frog jump. Even the palace guards did not have the ability to do this. Rolling and crawling to last 5 laps was already beyond his expectations. In the academy, there were almost no problems for poor students. No one would not cherish this kind of opportunity to reach the sky in one step. Some of the sons of officials and aristocratic families still needed more training. This was a show of strength. He believed that after today, it would be much easier to lead the troops under him. The bodies of the scholars were thin and weak. In the end, no one could last 10 laps before they were carried away by the imperial guards one by one. If I had known earlier, I would have read more books. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten such a low score. Yeah, fortunately. Fortunately, he was just scaring us. The 2 young men looked at each other and could see the joy in each other's eyes. Although they had passed the previous exam, they thought that it was safe to enter the Academy of Mathematics. After they returned, they did not even look at the so-called new mathematics textbook. Today's exam paper was like a book from heaven. They scored 1 or even 2 digits lower than the others. It could be said that they stood out from the crowd and earned everyone's attention. A figure walked over from afar. The two of them looked at him and hurriedly got up. "Greetings, Your Highness, Prince Jean." Li Han looked at them and asked, "You are Qin Zhong and Qin Hao?" Chapter 599. The Imperial College was the highest educational institution in the Jing Kingdom. The students there were all elites from all over the country, and they were very serious about learning. Today was the first official day of classes. However, the professors from the Imperial College were surprised to find that the students of the Imperial College were very serious and hardworking. They could tell from their attitude in class that they were even better than the students from the Imperial College. Part of the reason was that the academy did not give face to Prime Minister Qin and Minister Qin, making the two children of officials pack up and go home on the first day. The uniformed screams when they went down the stairs should also be one of the reasons. But the most important reason should be that the students restrained themselves, treated learning seriously and diligently. Ding, the bell rang, signaling the end of the morning class. "All right, that's all for the morning class. Remember to clean the blackboard." A teacher put down the chalk and walked out of the classroom. Although he had practiced it countless times, he still wasn't used to using the chalk in his hands. However, it had to be said that the chalk made by County Uncle Li was indeed convenient to use, even though there was no order to it. He flicked the chalk dust off his fingers and washed his hands with water outside before walking unhurriedly in the direction of the dining hall. He had already thought of the main course for lunch. It would be braised beef noodles with 2 extra eggs. It was free for lunch, which was the subsidy given by the Imperial Court to the teachers of the Imperial College. It was illegal to slaughter cattle without permission, so beef couldn't be eaten often. Thus, he decided to eat 2 bowls of noodles with 4 eggs today. "Sheng Yin, you, help me clean the blackboard," Wang Dan said weakly as she lay on the table in the classroom. "I don't have the strength." As soon as he finished speaking, another feeble voice came from beside him. Wang Dan covered her stomach that had been growling for a long time and said, "When are we going to eat?" Sheng Yin shook his head and said, "There are 10 steps to the dining hall." "I'm not going." Wang Dan lived on the 2nd floor of the dormitory. When she thought of the feeling when she went down the stairs this morning, her expression immediately became a little frightened. "Then I'm not eating either." 2 students carried large bowls into the classroom and found their seats. They ate and read books at the same time. For students from poor families, educational resources were scarce. Sometimes, just to borrow a book, they would have to travel dozens of miles. Whether it was eating or going to the toilet, they would not let go of any time that they could read. The braised beef noodles were very fragrant. The 2 students were watching 30 years of scientific examination, 50 years of simulation, while slurping the noodles. The fragrance instantly filled the entire classroom. Gulp. Wang Dan started to drool uncontrollably. "Beast!" Sheng Yin's throat quivered as he cursed in his heart. The 2 of them looked at each other with anger on their faces. The classroom was a place for learning. Did they think it was a cafeteria? The 2 brothers in front. In the end, Wang Dan couldn't help but speak first. After calling them twice, the 2 people in front came back to their senses and asked doubtfully, "What can I do for you two?" Wang Dan squeezed out a smile and said, "Can the 2 of you help us buy lunch from the dining hall?" The faces of the 2 commoners were filled with difficulty. This round trip would take up at least 2 questions' time. Pa. Wang Dan placed a silver ingot on the table and said, "Help us buy some food and this silver ingot is yours." Delicious. In front of Wang Dan was a bowl the size of a human head. At this moment, he was slurping on the noodles. Although he wasn't the legitimate son of the Wang family, it was precisely because he wasn't the eldest son that he didn't have to bear much responsibility. He had been pampered since he was young, but right now, He almost cried when he saw this bowl of braised beef noodles. Beside him, Zheng Yin wasn't much better. He had been starving since yesterday. Not to mention a bowl of beef noodles, even if there was a cow in front of him, a cow, he naturally wouldn't be able to eat it. The two of them raised their heads and looked at each other. Instantly, they had the feeling of brothers going through thick and thin together. It was better to go through thick and thin together than to share riches. After yesterday's incident, the already close relationship between the two of them was once again pulled closer. Good brother. Wang Dan took a piece of beef from his bowl and passed it to him. His arms stiffened in midair. He raised his head and asked, "Why is there so much more beef in your bowl than mine?" "Hello, Dean." In the courtyard, the young man bowed respectfully to Li Yi, his face full of awe. Wang Yong patted his brother's shoulder and said to Li Yi with a smile, "This child has been mischievous since he was young. He has caused trouble for Dean Li. It's no trouble at all. This child is very obedient." Li Yi smiled and patted his brother's head. Wang Yong pointed in a certain direction and said to Wang Dan, "Go over there and wait for a while. I have something to say to Dean Li." The young man nodded obediently. After taking a few steps, he heard laughter coming from a room beside him. When he turned his head to look, his eyes couldn't help but widen. In the room, although young, His Highness Prince Jean, who was very knowledgeable and liked to teach students all day long, was riding on a monster and shaking it with all his might. On his face was a smile that he had never seen before. "Ah, faster, faster." Li Han was riding on Pleasant Goat. The guard at the side pushed a thick pole up and down, causing the cart to shake. Li Han laughed loudly. In the next moment, he seemed to realize something. He suddenly raised his head and looked outside the door. When he saw a pair of shocked eyes, the smile on his face froze. "Stop." He got off the cart, straightened his clothes, and walked to the door. With a calm expression, he said, "Wang Dan, why are you here?" It's over, it's over." Seeing Mr. Jin's expression, Wang Dan's heart gradually sank. He accidentally saw this side of Mr. Jin. How was he going to live in the academy in the future? In an instant, he felt like he had just escaped from the tiger's mouth and entered the wolf's den. I wonder how big the big business that Brother Li is talking about is. Wang Yong put down his teacup and looked at Li Yi with a smile. It's even bigger than the perfume and liquor business. Li Yi looked at him and said, "I just don't know if the Wang family can handle it." Wang Yong was stunned for a moment. Then, the smile on his face became even brighter. "Brother Li, don't worry. In this world, there is no business that the Wang family can't handle." The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Some important matters had been settled with this smile. "Brother Wang, take care." After a while, Li Yi stood at the door and cupped his hands at Wang Yong. "Brother Li, I won't see you out." Wang Yong turned back and smiled. He left with Wang Dan, but the latter's face was a little pale as he left. On the horse, Wang Dan asked his brother in a trembling voice, "Big brother, can I not go to the academy?" "Nonsense." Wang Yong looked at him and said in a low voice, "Father spent so much effort to send you there. How can you let him down like this?" Sigh. Wang Dan sighed as she listened to the nagging. She closed her eyes in despair. In the courtyard, Fang's eyes widened. He held something under the sunlight and looked at it carefully. He asked, "Young master, do you think this broken thing is worth much?" "Broken thing?" Li Yi was also fiddling with something in his hand. After several rounds of continuous improvement, its quality was much better than before. However, since he wanted to perfect it, he could not rush it. For the time being, he decided to experiment for a while longer. If he made some slight improvements, the price would not be as simple as doubling. When he heard old Fang's words, he tossed the item over and asked, "How much do you think this little thing is worth?" It only costs a few copper coins. How much can it be worth? But it's colorful and pretty. Fong looked at it again and looked at Li Yi. He said uncertainly, 2 taels of silver. Chapter 600. Don't look at me like that again. Li Yi was searching for information in his mind. He looked up and saw that Fong's eyes were as wide as copper bells. He had been staring at him like this for at least a quarter of an hour. Ever since he knew that these pieces of junk could realize his dream of having a beautiful wife, a beautiful concubine, and a big house, he had been staring at him like this. It still doesn't work. Li Yi sighed. The colorless glass had not been baked yet. He had to find a way to remove the metal elements inside. Moreover, there were a lot of bubbles inside, which greatly reduced the visual impact. If he took it outside and said that it was a glass that was gifted by the heavens and was worth tens of thousands of gold coins, not many people would believe it. Improvement, the process had to be improved. Moreover, when the time came to do the modeling, he needed skilled craftsmen, and they had to be his own people. He would not feel at ease leaving it to others. Casually throwing away the defective product in his hand, Fong moved like a hungry dog pouncing on its food and finally saved it before it fell to the ground. However, he fell face first into the mud. Getting up from the ground, he did not even have time to pat the dust off his body. He glared at Li Yi and said, "Young master, what are you doing?" He gently stroked the object in his hand. What was this? This was a house, a concubine, and a dream. Moreover, his dream had changed a few days ago. A big house was no longer a problem for him. If he could live in the palace that the young master mentioned and have dozens of people serving him, how comfortable would that be? Li Yi looked at him and said, "This thing is not that valuable now. Wear it into beads, make it into jewelry, and make some beautiful styles. Tell them to work hard and don't be lazy. We don't have so much time to waste. If anyone dares to be lazy, break his dog legs." Fong carefully put away the thing in his hand and strode outside. In fact, he had been the laziest during this period of time. However, at that moment, he suddenly realized that since the son-in-law had entrusted this task to him, he had to do his best. He couldn't be lazy, he couldn't slack, and he couldn't let down the son-in-law's trust and expectations in him. Although he still had some doubts about whether this thing could be sold for such a high price, his son-in-law wouldn't let him do something meaningless. When he walked out of the door, he saw a few naughty children playing on the sand. He kicked the nearest naughty child's butt and scolded, "Go play somewhere else." In early February, the willow tree by the lake of the Faculty of Mathematics had already begun to sprout. The green jade grew to the height of the tree, and thousands of green ribbons hung down. The lake water was clear, and fish could be seen swimming occasionally. A gentle breeze blew from the surface of the lake. Sitting on the grassland with a small slope, leaning against the willow tree, Rinpoche held a copy of 30 Years of Scientific Examination, 50 Years of Simulation. Such a scene was naturally what Li Yi had imagined. Now, there was only a bare grassland. On the other side of the grassland, a few students who didn't finish their homework on time were frog jumping with their hands tied. Further away, there was a crowd of people watching. The bell rang, signaling the start of class. The crowd dispersed and walked quickly to the classroom. Li Han's plump body stood at the door of a classroom. The students who passed by him would greet him respectfully, "Good day, sir." He had a book under his arm. When the bell rang for the second time, he slowly stepped into the classroom. Compared to a few days ago, he was more mature and steady now. He never pretended to be polite in front of the students. No one could associate him with the silly guy who was sitting in the rocking car yesterday afternoon. "Stand up." "Good day, sir." A uniform voice immediately came from the classroom. There were many rules in the Faculty of Mathematics. For example, they had to do morning exercises before class in the morning. The second set of national primary school radio gymnastics was even more shameful than frog jumping. However, it was set by the dean, who didn't show his face often and had absolute authority in the faculty. No one could violate it. Gymnastics or frog jumping. This was a choice without hesitation. More than 100 rough men dancing awkwardly on the field was, of course, an eyesore. Therefore, after seeing it once, Lee didn't want to see it again. When the Faculty of Mathematics was recruiting students, he didn't think of getting some female students in. Although it was impossible to let them attend class together, it would be good to see them from afar after class. Otherwise, in a certain kind of upper-class society, Lee would really be worried that there would be a scandal in the student dormitory if he didn't see any women all year round. That would also make him lose face as the dean. However, the possibility of this proposal being passed wasn't high. Although the situation of women in the capital city had changed a lot, it wasn't to the extent that adult men and women could study together in the same classroom. On one side of the Faculty of Mathematics was the Jing Kingdom Girls' School that was still under construction. On the other side was the science faculty that had already been completed and would soon open. Forget about the science faculty, there definitely wouldn't be women. However, the Princess Royal Highness Girls' School was different. When the time came, they could organize some superficial exchanges between the students of the two Faculty of Mathematics. In time, they could change the unhealthy habits in the hearts of some of the Faculty of Mathematics. Inside the classroom, Li Han was writing something on the blackboard. He wasn't tall enough, so Li Yi asked the carpenter to specially make a step for him. This kid was born to do mathematics, especially when there was no need for advanced mathematics. In the past year, he had already mastered elementary mathematics to a certain level. The students of the Faculty of Mathematics were actually much easier to teach and manage than the students of the future. Everyone was an adult, and they were adults with terrifying self-awareness. Those who could pass the admission exam didn't lack a foundation in mathematics. What they lacked was the ability to change and guide their thinking. For them, they were already familiar with Arabic numerals. Now, they were gradually changing their traditional thinking. The few mathematics PhDs taught different subjects. Elementary algebra and elementary geometry were currently the main subjects of study. Li Han didn't teach these. In his words, he didn't want to teach these things that were only for children. He was the only teacher in the entire Faculty of Mathematics who could teach application of mathematics. The course Application of Mathematics involves specific problems. For example, how to determine the specific number of chickens and rabbits in cages without any indescribable incidents. For example, how to use shadows to measure the height of the Hall of Diligent Government without climbing to the roof. For example, how long would it take for the soldiers of the Jing Kingdom to catch up with the soldiers of the Qi Kingdom who could travel 80 kilometers in a day during a march to a war? And so on, and so on. Where there is a loan, there is a loan. Where there is a loan, there must be an equal loan. Li Han wrote these words on the blackboard, then pointed at someone below and said, "Wang Dan, can you explain to me what I meant by what I said in the last lesson?" A young man stood up helplessly and said, "Sir, if there's a loan, there must be a loan. If there's a loan, there must be a loan. If there's a loan, there must be an equal one. This is the basic rule of the debit and credit bookkeeping method." The specific content is, the young man explained the concept clearly. Li Han nodded in satisfaction and said, "You said it well. Sit down." He turned around and said, "Today, we will use a few specific examples to explain what the debit and credit bookkeeping method is all about." Li looked out the window. Li Han had already stepped onto the stairs. He was waving his short arms and writing something on the blackboard. It was hard to imagine that he was only 10 years old. If he continued to develop like this, it wouldn't be long before he could enjoy a peaceful retirement. Hurry up and grow up. Li Yi looked at the figure in the classroom and thought to himself. Chapter 601. As Li Yi flipped through the account books at home, Li Xian stood in front of him with a haggard face. The Academy of Sciences was about to open, but he hadn't even solved the problem of military provisions. It would be strange if he wasn't anxious. Take it. Li Yi took out a book from the drawer and threw it at him. He had paid the price of a pimple by staying up late to write it. It was all about the ideas of modern military provisions and the specific production methods. As for the problem of sealing, it was also described in detail. Some modern methods couldn't be realized, and the methods that could be adopted were very limited. Fortunately, it wasn't impossible. As long as one found the right direction and overcome one or two technical difficulties, it would be fine. This was not a difficult task for Li Xian, who had a lot of skilled craftsmen under him. Not long after, Li Xian walked out of the room with a relaxed expression. However, he was pulled over by the proud Lolita who was guarding outside the door. She glanced into the room and said in a low voice, "Brother Xian, I want to ask you something. Don't lie to me." "What is it?" Li Xian looked puzzled. The proud Lolita pulled him to the corner and asked, "Sir, were you kidnapped by Sister Rui to get married?" Li Xian looked at her and said, "Why are you asking this? Just tell me." The proud Lolita twisted her body and said. Li Xian nodded and asked again, "Yes, what's wrong?" "It's really a bride kidnapping." The proud Lolita first widened her eyes. After glancing into the room again, she narrowed her eyes and looked thoughtful. Recently, the atmosphere in the court was a little depressed. The news revealed by the Imperial Physician Bureau showed that His Majesty's health was deteriorating, and the situation was not optimistic. An emperor was terrible, but an emperor who was about to reach the end of his life was even more terrible. This kind of terror was directly reflected in the recent iron-blooded measures taken by the Intelligence Division. Last time, the case of the Assistant Minister of Justice's corruption had involved a total of 100,000 taels of silver. It was a rare case of corruption in recent years. The Assistant Minister of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, was still locked up in the Supreme Court. Over the past few days, he had confessed to many people. Even 2 fifth-rank officials were involved. They were all purged by the Secret Intelligence Division. For a time, everyone in the imperial court felt insecure. Of course, there were different levels of danger. Among them, the ones who were the most terrified were naturally the King of Shu. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, had always been in close contact with the King of Shu. Naturally, the friends he befriended were also officials in the King of Shu's faction. Unfortunately, after he was caught for corruption, His Majesty issued an imperial edict that if he confessed to one person, his punishment would be reduced by a bit. It was said that Sir Zhao's punishment had already changed from beheading to 530 years in prison. If he worked harder and confessed to a few more of the country's vermin, he might still have a chance to see the light of day again in his lifetime. As a result, some officials in the King of Shu's faction had their properties confiscated and their properties sent to the national treasury. It was roughly estimated that in a few months, there were at least hundreds of thousands of taels of silver in the national treasury. His Majesty was obviously not satisfied with this. This time, he seemed to be determined to investigate the corrupt officials in the capital. This time, the Imperial Censorate was ordered to check the accounts of the yamen and departments to find the corrupt officials one by one. As soon as this order was issued, many officials in the capital panicked. 300,000 taels of silver is still far from enough. Jing Di drank a mouthful of snow pear soup and said with a frown. The Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, sighed and said, just like the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, who embezzled 100,000 taels of silver but did not dare to spend a penny. This is the only example. The few people he confessed had already squandered all the money they had embezzled. The remaining figures are just the figures obtained after calculating their properties when the Secret Intelligence Unit was ordered to confiscate their properties. Father, the accounts of the inner mansion have been verified. Sitting on the side, Li Han, who had been lowering his head and fiddling with the abacus, suddenly put down the abacus and stretched. So fast? Jing Di asked in surprise. Li Han smiled embarrassedly and fiddled with the abacus. He said, Sir's abacus is easy to use. The accounts of the inner mansion are clear. It doesn't take much effort. Jing Di nodded. The inner mansion was the department that managed the expenses of the palace and the royal family. Under his supervision, it was indeed unlikely that there would be any big mistakes. Previously, when they checked the accounts, the three of them needed at least 5 days to finish checking all the accounts. However, from the time Han started fiddling with the abacus, it had only been less than 4 hours, right? He wanted to ask a few more questions, but a eunuch outside the door reported that Deputy Minister Ma of the Imperial Censor was asking for an audience. The Imperial Censor had just received his order yesterday to check the accounts of all the yamens in the capital. Deputy Minister Ma must have come for this matter. Jing Di waved his hand and said, Enter. Deputy Minister Ma walked in from outside. He first bowed to Jing Di and then said, The Imperial Censor has been ordered by His Majesty to check the accounts of all the yamens in the capital. However, the Imperial Censor's attainments in mathematics are not high. In order to complete His Majesty's task as soon as possible, I would like to ask His Majesty for an edict to borrow a few students from the arithmetic school to assist the Imperial Censor in checking the accounts. A certain headmaster had once said that if the imperial court needed the help of the students of the School of Mathematics, they could just speak up. Things like auditing accounts should be left to those who specialized in mathematics. As for the imperial censorate, it was enough for them to act as a supervisor. Approved. Jing Di glanced to his side and said, Han, you can choose some students from the arithmetic school to assist the imperial censor. Li Han raised his head and said, Father, the students of the arithmetic school have to go out for an internship to help the court and earn credits. It must be signed by the director himself. Hearing this, Jing Di waved his hand at Deputy Minister Ma and said, In that case, you can go find Li Yi yourself. Deputy Minister Ma could only helplessly retreat after hearing this. The reason why he came to see His Majesty first was that he was worried that County Uncle Li would ask for an exorbitant price and ask for a huge reward from them. The imperial censor was a well-paid yeoman. The imperial censors were all poor. How could they have any reward to pay them? He sighed. Since His Majesty said so, he could only try his luck first. Borrow people. After listening to Deputy Minister Ma in front of him, Li Yi nodded and said, How many people do you want? Deputy Minister Ma looked at him and asked tentatively, Director Li, how should we calculate the reward for the students? Li Yi waved his hand and said, They have the opportunity to contribute to the court. That is their duty. There is no need to talk about rewards. Deputy Minister Ma was stunned for a moment. When he looked at Li Yi again, he immediately felt a deep sense of guilt. County Uncle Li was a real gentleman. He had guessed him before. He really gauged the heart of a gentleman with his own mean measure. He shouldn't have. I only need 10 people. Deputy Minister Ma cupped his hands and said, It's not good to leave one. I will round it up and give you 11. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, Leave one. Deputy Minister Ma looked at him doubtfully. It's not important. Li Yi waved his hand and said, In short, I will give you 11 people. Deputy Minister Ma gave 11 people. Deputy Minister Ma felt even more guilty. He looked ashamed and cupped his hands and said, Thank you, Director Li. I will definitely put in a good word for Director Li in front of His Majesty. Deputy Minister Ma, you are too polite. Li Yi smiled and said, It's what we should do to earn your salary and share your worries. Chapter 602. There was something wrong with Fong the past few days. He always looked a little too excited. Li noticed that his eyes were shining when he looked at the pile of sand at the entrance. Something was wrong with the arrogant Lolita too. Li noticed that her eyes were shining when she looked at him. Fong's illness was incurable. He probably thought that money was floating in the sky. As for the arrogant Lolita, it was hard to guess what a girl was thinking. Li didn't want to guess. At least for now, she hadn't made any further moves. He had to teach Li Han how to use the debit and credit bookkeeping method. After all, this was the first internship for the students of the School of Mathematics. They had to make some achievements so that they wouldn't be looked down upon by the imperial court. Accounting was broad and profound. Tax evasion and falsification were all inseparable from this line of work. If they were to learn these things systematically, the School of Mathematics would have to open a new accounting major. It would take 4 years for undergraduate students and 3 years for postgraduate students to be able to produce a few experts in this field. Although the little fatty was a genius, he had only learned how to use the debit and credit bookkeeping method to check the accounts. However, it was enough for him. He couldn't use the more profound methods at the moment. This world still used the very unscientific accounting method of keeping accounts. Keeping accounts by date made it very troublesome to check the accounts. If one wanted to falsify the accounts and take advantage of loopholes, it couldn't be any easier, and it wouldn't be easy for the higher-ups to find out. Since the old emperor was determined to fight against corruption this time, he would give him a big wave. Using this method to check the accounts, no small fly could hide from the big tiger. While Li Yi was explaining the details to Monarch Jean, the arrogant Lolita was sitting on a small stool not far away. She supported her chin with one hand and blinked her eyes as she watched. After a while, she put down her arms and clenched her fists. She murmured, "If I still don't marry him when I'm 18, I'll snatch him." After lunch, many students of the School of Mathematics gathered under the high wall where the results were posted. They were discussing something in low voices. This time, the wall wasn't posted about the exam rankings. It was about something else. The imperial censorate had been ordered by the emperor to investigate the accounts of the various yamen in the capital. They had borrowed a dozen students from the School of Mathematics and Mathematics. The names of the students who had been lucky enough to be chosen were pasted on the paper. Chen Lisan, Qin Feng, Cui Shixin, Li Jianren, Tsing Zijian. After looking at the names on the list, many people immediately sighed, and their expressions were slightly gloomy. It turned out that the principal's words weren't just empty words. The students of the academy could familiarize themselves with the bureaucracy and accumulate experience by going out for an internship. At the same time, they could also establish a foundation in the Ministry of Personnel, which would greatly benefit their future prospects. This time, assisting the imperial censorate in auditing the accounts was the first opportunity for an academy student to participate in an internship. Those who were lucky enough to be selected would be able to obtain enough credits after the internship. These credits were very important as they would determine whether or not they could successfully graduate from the Mathematics Academy in the future. If they missed this opportunity, they could only wait for the next one. Chen Lisan, Qin Feng. Sigh, all of them. Don't tell me that there's no chance for us poor students. Shove, Brother Su, be careful with your words. This is only the first time. We will have more chances in the future. The students from poorer families discussed in low voices, and there were inevitably times when they sighed. There was no other reason other than the fact that the 11 people on the list were all from aristocratic families, and none of them were poor students. Compared to those people, the opportunities for poor students were pitifully few. Now that Dean Li was finally willing to do something for the poor students, they didn't expect that even the precious opportunity to go out for an internship would be treated so unfairly. A student from a poor family sighed and said, "The principal has already done enough for us. Not only did he let us study here, he even applied for a living allowance from the imperial court. For this, he has already offended too many powerful officials. We cannot make things difficult for him anymore. Yes, we are indebted to little Dean Lee. We are poor students, so we definitely cannot do anything to make things difficult for him. Isn't that ungrateful? Another student from a poor family said righteously. This matter ends here, no further discussion is allowed. If you have the energy, go back and do a few more sets of simulation scrolls. A sound of agreement came from the crowd, and they quickly dispersed, returning to their respective classrooms. On the other side, under a willow tree, several figures gathered together, and their expressions were not very good. After a moment of silence, someone was finally the first to speak. That surnamed Lee would definitely not give such a good thing to us, and it just had to be the 11 of us, not one more, not one less. There must be a trick in this. Chen Lisan raised his head and said coldly. That's right. Qin Feng nodded, and then said, Qin Zhong and Qin Hao have already been eliminated by him. We have become a thorn in his side, a thorn in his flesh. This must be another plot of his. Cui Shixin was the calmest and most composed of them all. After thinking for a moment, he opened his mouth and said, but, this matter of checking the accounts was ordered by His Majesty to supervise the Imperial Censorate. That surnamed Li has no right to interfere. We are only accompanying the Imperial Censorate to check the accounts. I really can't think of any conspiracy he could have. Shixin is right, I also can't think of any conspiracy in this. Another young man said, moreover, this is indeed an opportunity for us, we can't let it go easily. The person who spoke was Xing Zijian, whose father was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue. Among them, he could be regarded as a wise man. Cui Shixin and Xing Zijian's words were soon agreed by the others. The reason why they came to the arithmetic college was that they were not valued in their own families. The future master of the Qin family was Qin Lijun, not Qin Lisan. The Qin family had Qin Yu, and Qin Feng could not stand out. The Cui family naturally had nothing to do with Cui Shixin. Although they had powerful families behind them, they still had to fight for their own future. As for Xing Zijian, although he was the eldest son of the Xing family was just a new family in the capital city. More than 10 years ago, it was involved in a big case. All the men of the eldest branch were killed, and the women entered the musical house. The second branch gradually rose in recent years because of the relationship with the king of Shu. One person gritted his teeth and said, even if there is a conspiracy, we are not necessarily afraid of him. The matter of checking the accounts is sensitive. If he really does something, His Majesty will not spare him. Chen Lisan nodded and said, yes, we might as well go and have a look. If there is really something fishy, then he is courting death. Everyone readily agreed, and there was no longer any worry in their hearts. Chapter 603. I'll leave the accounts to you. The two censors cupped their hands in obeisance to the 3 young men in front of them and said with a smile. Behind them, more than 10 palace guards stood solemnly. The 3 young men were dressed like scholars and had folding fans tied around their waists. They looked high-spirited, but there was a square object hanging on the other side, which looked a bit strange. You two are too polite. This is what we should be doing. Cui Shixin smiled and cupped his hands together. One of the censors smiled and said, time is of the essence. Let's talk as we go. Please. Cui Shixin extended his hand. They were ordered by the emperor to investigate the accounts. Cui Shixin and the others were divided into 4 groups of 3. At this time, the 3 of them were going to a county in the suburbs near the capital. Although there were 2 imperial censors in charge of this trip, the status of these 3 people was not ordinary. The 2 imperial censors did not dare to put on airs. Moreover, the Deputy Prime Minister had already instructed them to show sufficient respect to the students of the Calculation Academy. Chen County was a small county less than 50 miles away from the capital. It was neither too close nor too far away. Although it wasn't as rich as Jing County, it was still near the capital. It wasn't rich, but it wasn't poor either. At this time, in the government office of Chin County, the county magistrate was pacing back and forth in the hall. His face showed a hint of anxiety. After a while, he raised his head and asked, "Are they coming today?" A middle-aged man with a mustache walked out and said, "Sir, according to the news from the capital, the investigation this time will start from a few counties in the suburbs near the capital. Chen County will be the first to bear the brunt. There should be people arriving today." County Magistrate Zhao looked up at him and asked, "Advisor Ma, do you think this time is safe?" Advisor Ma smiled and said, "Sir, don't worry. That person is an expert in accounting. He does things flawlessly. Even the emperor can't find anything wrong with the account books in his hands." Advisor Ma looked at him and asked, "Sir, did you forget that there were also censors who came to investigate the accounts before the new year? They stayed in the household for 3 days, but in the end, they found nothing." Hearing this, County Magistrate Zhao was finally relieved and said, "That's true. Those useless imperial censors are far from being able to investigate our accounts." As soon as he finished speaking, a yamen runner came forward to report that the useless imperial censor of the capital had arrived. "Please, sirs. I've been waiting for you for a long time." County Magistrate Zhao greeted them with a smile and cupped his hands. Even though his rank was higher than these two censors, they came from above, so he naturally had to be courteous. One of the imperial censors said, "We have come to Qin County on the orders of His Majesty to examine the accounts of the yamen. Please cooperate, County Magistrate Zhao." "Of course I'll cooperate." County Magistrate Zhao smiled and said, "A few days ago, an imperial censor came to investigate, but since it is the order of His Majesty, we naturally have to fulfill our duties. 2 sirs, please follow me." When County Magistrate Zhao led the 2 censors to the house, he looked back at the 3 young men behind him and asked in confusion, "These 3 are?" "He's a student who came along to audit the accounts," one of the imperial censors explained. County Magistrate Zhao nodded and didn't ask any more questions. He just felt that these 3 people were strange no matter how he looked at them, and a faint sense of foreboding arose in his heart. "All the accounts of last year are here." County Magistrate Zhao brought them to the house and pointed at several thick books on the table. He sneered in his heart. These things looked big, and it was impossible to finish reading them in a short time. Cui Shixin put down the abacus and said, "County Magistrate Zhao, please prepare some writing brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone." "Okay." County Magistrate Zhao responded and said, "Advisor Ma, did you hear that? Hurry up and prepare." Writing brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone were all prepared. According to the rules, as a county magistrate, he had to avoid arousing suspicion. County Magistrate Zhao said with a smile, "You guys take your time to check, I'll leave first." When he walked out of the door, he saw that the 3 strange people had already spread out the white paper. They were fiddling with a square object pierced with beads and writing something on the paper. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he strode out. Walking to the yard, he glanced at the 2 rows of imperial guards outside the door and ordered the advisor, "You guys have worked hard on the audit. Advisor, go to Spring Fragrance Restaurant and order a table of good wine and food. Ask them to send it over at mealtime." In the house, hearing the crackling sound, the 2 censors looked at each other, picked up their teacups and took a sip. They walked over to have a look and then came back to have a sip of tea. This was truly an easy mission. 23 RD of July, by 5 cut rice paper. Cui Shixin glanced at the account book in his hand and opened another one. After comparing, he sneered and said, 100 taels. 5 cut rice paper for 100 taels. Is the rice paper of County Magistrate Zhao's family made of silver? He picked up the brush and wrote a few words on the paper. A young man opposite him also moved and said with a smile, "There are some here too. The difference between the loans is too big. It's too naive to think that such a clumsy method can fool us." The two censors were stunned for a moment and then immediately put down their teacups. So fast. I also found 2 here. The last young man smiled and said, "Hurry up and work, and you can go back earlier. I'll treat you to dinner at Drunken Moon Restaurant tonight." "That's great." The two of them laughed, and the crackling sounds of their hands became even louder. County Magistrate Zhao sat in the back hall for 2 hours. He couldn't get rid of the bad feeling in his heart. In annoyance, he walked to the front hall. Just as he stepped out of the door, he saw the 2 censors and the 3 young men coming out of the house. He was stunned for a moment and then immediately greeted them with a smile. He couldn't even finish reading half of the account book in 2 hours. So, the checking of the account books was actually just a formality. It seemed that he had worried for nothing. The smile on his face was even brighter. He walked forward and said, "You must be tired from checking the account books. I've just asked people to prepare a banquet. You might as well eat before you leave. Otherwise, it will be my negligence." The censor looked at him coldly and said, "Arrest him." While County Magistrate Zhao was stunned, the 2 imperial guards had already pressed his shoulders. County Magistrate Zhao immediately shouted, "What are you doing? What are we doing?" The censor sneered and threw a few pieces of paper on his face. He said, "Zhao Bin, in 1 year, 7,000 taels of silver have been embezzled by you." Hearing this, County Magistrate Zhao's body shook violently. When his eyes swept over the papers on the ground, his expression was extremely frightened and then immediately turned pale. "Thank you 3 for today." A censor cupped his hands to Cui Shixin and the other 2 and said, "When we return to the capital, we will definitely ask for your merit in front of His Majesty." "Thank you very much, Your Excellencies." Cui Shixin smiled and cupped his hands. A trace of a smile also appeared on the faces of the 2 behind him. That Li Yi really didn't have any conspiracy and gave them such a great merit for nothing. Could it be that he was showing goodwill to them and His Highness, the King of Shu? Dream on. Fong was really possessed. He thought that he could throw mountains of gold and silver at him one by one just because he had mastered the method of turning sand into colored glass. He didn't know that the rarer something was, the less valuable it was. If there were too many of them, they wouldn't be valuable anymore. He could only take advantage of the beginning to make a huge profit, mercilessly smashed Fong's dream. When he turned around, he saw the proud Lolita sitting at the door and looking at him. Li Yi walked over and looked at her. He asked, "Why do you keep looking at me these days? How do you know that I'm looking at you if you don't look at me?" The proud Lolita glanced at him and hummed a little tune, leaving him with an extremely cool back view. Li Yi stared blankly in a certain direction until her figure disappeared. Then he slowly withdrew his gaze. Could it be that the age of 12 was the dividing line between a Lolita and a young girl? The proud Lolita who had just turned 12 seemed to be becoming more and more feminine. Chapter 604. The county magistrate of Qin County had embezzled nearly 10,000 taels of silver in 1 year. He was caught red-handed by the imperial guards and escorted to the capital. Wang County. One of the imperial censors cupped his hands in salute to the county magistrate and smiled. "Magistrate Cui is an honest and upright official. You are truly a role model for our officials. These accounts are clear and there are no problems. It is my duty." "You flatter me." Magistrate Cui smiled. "We still have duties to perform and will not stay here any longer. Farewell." The censor said to the county magistrate and turned to the three young men behind him. Let's go. I will see you out. County Magistrate Chui escorted those people to the door. When the two censors turned around, he nodded to one of the young men in an unnoticeable manner. Qinghe County. 3,000 taels of silver in half a year. Magistrate Wei, you are very capable. The censor named Wan Su looked coldly at the magistrate and waved his hand. Arrest him. They had just checked the accounts of Qinghe County and found that there was a deficit of 3,000 taels of silver. The accounts involved were all handled by this magistrate. According to the emperor's decree, anyone who embezzled more than 1,000 taels of silver could be arrested on the spot and escorted to the capital. Magistrate Wei was pressed on the shoulders by two imperial guards. He looked at a young man behind him and said loudly, I recognize you. Xing family. You are from the Xing family. Didn't I reject your offer? How dare you frame me like this? I will definitely seek justice from the emperor. Take him away. Wan Su snorted. The students from the Abacus Academy had been ordered by the emperor to help them check the accounts. In reality, they were no longer helping. Without them, the mission would not have gone so smoothly. The deficit accounts were clearly displayed. No matter what personal grudges they had, corruption was corruption and there was no way to argue against it. Courting death. Seeing Magistrate Wei being escorted away, Xing Zijian's mouth twitched. He held the abacus in one hand and followed the others out of the county government. Within a day, 3 officials were escorted to the capital for corruption. The officials in the counties near the capital were in a state of panic. The people in the yamen of the capital who had not been found finally began to panic. Every year, the imperial court would send people to check the accounts, but in reality, there were very few results. How could those who had the guts to make a fuss about the accounts be found out so easily? However, this time, His Majesty seemed to be serious. He asked the students of the Divination Academy to help him check the accounts. The imperial court had not been able to find anything for many years. Once they got involved, everyone knew that such a thing would happen because of those students. Bastards, this is how they work for the imperial court. In the hall of diligent government, Emperor Jing slammed the table with a gloomy expression. In just one day, he had uncovered a case that involved tens of thousands of taels of silver. The national treasury was in a tight spot, and in recent days, he had been meticulously calculating every single coin he had. However, he did not expect that these officials would be so daring in corruption. If even the capital was like this, then what would the situation be like in even more remote places? Where did all the funds allocated by the imperial court go? How many people falsified the annual tax accounts in various places? Your Majesty, please take care of your body. Don't get angry. Changde stood behind him and pressed one hand on Emperor Jing's back as he spoke slowly. At this moment, Prime Minister Qin stood up and bowed. Your Majesty, in this old minister's opinion, the matter of checking the accounts can no longer be done. Check. Why can't we check it? Emperor Jing slammed the table and said coldly, I want to see how many more vermin like them are in front of me. Prime Minister Qin looked up, sighed, and silently returned to his original position. It was necessary to check the accounts. Every year, the imperial court sent imperial censors to check everywhere. They would always catch some vermin, which was also a kind of deterrence for other officials. However, it was said that officials should be honest and clean, but how many of them could really live up to these words? He had already understood the method of checking the accounts of the students of the academy. In this way, almost all the officials' accounts would be exposed in broad daylight. How much of a shock would this cause to the entire imperial court and the whole world? If they really did as His Majesty said and thoroughly checked, I'm afraid, the country would no longer be a country. Emperor Jing looked down at the dozen people below and asked, Dear ministers, what else do you want to say? No one, including the 2 prime ministers and the 6 ministers, answered. They were all old foxes in the officialdom. This time, His Majesty was clearly determined to eliminate a group of people. If they raised objections at this time, didn't it mean that they had a guilty conscience? Moreover, during this period of time, His Majesty's actions had become more and more resolute. He was autocratic and even refused to listen to advice. Even if most of the edicts were for the Jing kingdom and the world, his methods were still too tough. If it was not handled well, the entire imperial court would be shaken. In the academy, Chen Lisan, Cui Shixin, and the others had just returned. They all looked happy and high-spirited. Our luck is really bad. Why are you the only ones who found out? Li Jianren looked a little depressed and said with a sigh. The other 3 groups all had gains today. Only they did not find any big mistakes in the accounts, so they returned empty-handed. Cui Shixin smiled and said, "It's okay. I'm afraid it will take a long time to check the accounts. Your luck won't always be so bad." At this time, Tsing Zijin suddenly looked at Cui Shixin and asked, "The county magistrate of Wang County?" Cui Shixin looked at him and said, "He's an uncle in the family." They looked at each other and smiled. They both understood something from each other's eyes. This time, we can finally hold our heads high. Chen Lisan smiled and couldn't help but show a proud expression on his face. Before today, they did not even think that they would have such a big harvest from the accounts. Those imperial censors were all decorations. As long as they did not make it too obvious, this was completely a feast for them. When he thought about the faces of those people at home, he couldn't help but feel extremely happy. The other students of the academy looked at them with envious expressions as they walked past them. They had already heard about what happened today. In terms of ability, they far surpassed these people, but they had no chance. They could only watch as the credit fell on their heads, the Qin family. In a certain room, a woman said with a worried expression, "I wonder how Feng is doing. He hasn't been home for a few days. How is he going to take care of himself?" The middle-aged man sitting at the table said, "Madam, don't worry. He is no longer a child. He can take care of himself. As parents, we can't give him anything. We can only rely on him to earn everything." The woman sighed and said, "Fortunately, His Majesty values the Mathematics Academy very much. After Feng comes out from there, go and beg father to find a good job in the court. It's true that Qin Yu is the young master of the Qin family, but my Feng also has the blood of the Qin family flowing in his body." "I understand." The middle-aged man pondered for a moment and nodded. The room remained silent for a moment before the woman said, "Will His Majesty investigate the accounts this time? Will he find you?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "It's just a small matter. Catching a few county magistrates is enough. This matter involves a lot of people. His Majesty's order is only temporary and won't last long. If this goes on, the court will be in chaos in a few days. When that time comes, it will stop and we won't be able to find a place like the 6 ministries. This matter has nothing to do with us." The middle-aged man raised his head and said, "It's not easy to enter the academy. Otherwise, I would have sent someone to tell Feng not to participate in this matter. Even if the imperial censorate hid the identity of those people, it would not be able to withstand the investigation. If he really has the opportunity to become an official in the future, I'm afraid it will be a disaster and not a blessing." Chapter 605. Young Master, the Imperial Court seems to be checking some accounts recently. They have found more than a dozen corrupt officials. Everyone is talking about it. Should we also check the accounts of the shops? Feng walked into the room from outside and asked Li Yi. "No need." Li Yi bowed his head and said, waving his hand as he was busy. The accounts of the shops were checked every month. They had been taught how to check the accounts. Maybe someone could take a little advantage, but it was unlikely for a slightly larger amount to happen. He's not one of us. He might have other intentions, Fong said with some worry. What should be checked has been checked. Nothing can be found even if you check again. Instead, it will make others think more, which will do more harm than good. Li looked up and said, if it were you, would you be willing to be checked all day? Okay then. Fong thought about it and felt that it made some sense. He was also uncomfortable to be suspected by his wife for hiding money all day long. If you are really greedy and someone comes to check you, what will you do? Fong glanced at Li Yi and said, young master, I don't hide money. You can't say that. I didn't say that you hid money to buy jewelry for Xiaohong. Li Yi waved his hand and said, I mean, if you are a shopkeeper of a shop and someone comes to check you because you are greedy, what will you do? That depends on how much I am greedy, Fong thought about it and said. Thousands of taels. Thousands of taels. Fong curled his lips and said, can thousands of taels be called greedy? He almost forgot that this guy's current net worth couldn't be measured by common sense. He asked again, hundreds of thousands of taels. Hundreds of thousands of taels. Fong looked at Li Yi and suddenly laughed. If hundreds of thousands of taels are found out, won't it be fatal? If it were me. A sinister smile appeared on Fong's face. He slowly raised a hand and made a gesture of cutting his neck. The county magistrate of Qin County had all his property confiscated, his official position removed, and he was sent to prison. The magistrate of Qinghe County had the same treatment as him. Later, 2 officials who were found to have embezzled tens of thousands of taels would probably lose their heads. His Majesty had just flown into a rage in the Golden Hole. Prime Minister Qin and several ministers had advised to stop the audit of the accounts and had been scolded. His Majesty's action directly indicated that the audit of the accounts would not be stopped for a while. This also meant that many people would be unlucky. Prime Minister Qin, this is absolutely wrong. After the morning court, Prime Minister Qin walked out of the main hall. A middle-aged official followed behind him and said anxiously, purging all the corrupt people in the Qin dynasty cannot be so eager for quick success. If His Majesty continues to be so radical, the imperial court will fall into chaos in less than half a month. His Majesty has made up his mind. No one can persuade him. To be careful, the minister said. Prime Minister Qin, Master. Seeing Prime Minister Qin leave, the middle-aged official's face flashed with a trace of undetectable gloom. He walked out of the palace gate, got on a carriage, and said in a low voice, investigate. A sound came from outside the carriage. Someone was walking away. Who is it? Find them immediately. We can't let them investigate any further. Send people to Qin County, Wang County, and Qinghe County to inquire, find a way to make them stop. If necessary, don't hesitate to. The same gloomy voice sounded in some parts of the capital. The Imperial College was different from the Imperial College. It implemented a semi-closed management. There were 5 days of classes and 2 days of rest. During these 5 days, no student was allowed to leave the college unless there was a mission. Today was the day of rest that they had been waiting for. The students were free to go out and visit their relatives and friends, or go to the brothel to have some fun. It was their freedom. When Qin Feng stepped into the Qin family's gate again, he finally felt a sense of relief. Young master, slow down. Qin Yu walked out of the mansion with a few green-clothed servants following behind him, cautiously reminding him of this. Qin Yu glanced at Qin Feng before shifting his gaze and brushing past him. Trash. Qin Feng watched the young master of the Qin family walk past him. When the few of them walked away, he whispered. In the mansion, the person he disliked the most was this young master of the Qin family, who had a tarnished reputation and almost lost the face of the Qin family. However, this person was the eldest son of the Qin family. In the end, the Qin family would be handed over to this person. Qin Feng gritted his teeth and secretly spat in a certain direction. He strode into the mansion. Feng, you're back. How are you in the academy? Are you used to the food and living here? A middle-aged woman came out from the courtyard and grabbed his arm. I'm used to the food and living here. Qin Feng said with a smile. Mother, let's go in and talk. Prime Minister Qin had a prosperous family. He had a total of 5 sons, 3 of which were officials in the court. The eldest son of the Qin family was considered to be the one most likely to take over Prime Minister Qin's position. However, because he lost a game in the court, he was transferred away from the center of power. Now, although Prime Minister Qin was still supporting the family, the Qin family's decline was obvious. Today was the Qin Manor's monthly family banquet. Although Qin Feng also had the qualifications to participate in the family banquet, in the past, he could only sit in the corner. As for the topic of the banquet, it had nothing to do with him. Feng, how are you doing in the academy? I heard that your Dean Li is very powerful. How powerful is he? A voice came from beside him. Qin Feng turned his head and looked over. He casually said a few words and then retracted his thoughts. Sitting beside him was his 5th uncle. Although he was a generation older than him, in terms of presence in the Qin family, he was inferior to him. Because of an incident 2 years ago, he lost all face and became the laughingstock of the capital. Even the servants of the Qin family, who were respectful to him on the surface, were probably mocking him in their hearts. Glancing at Qin Yu, who was sitting very close to the front, a trace of gloominess flashed through his eyes. At this time, Prime Minister Qin's eldest son, Qin Yan, opened his mouth and said, "The Calculation Academy is a good place. If you can successfully graduate from there, your future prospects will be limitless." Qin Zhong. What a pity. Knowing the importance of the Calculation Academy, the Qin family arranged for 2 people in the Calculation Academy, Qin Zhong and Qin Feng. However, Qin Zhong was expelled from the Calculation Academy on the first day. The reason given by the Calculation Academy was very sufficient. Even the Qin family had nothing to say. Qin Zhong lowered his head. At this time, it was better for him not to open his mouth. Qin Yan didn't seem to have any intention of continuing this topic. He thought of something, looked at Qin Feng and asked, "Feng, do you know who the Calculation Academy cooperated with the Imperial Censor to investigate the accounts?" For an official of Qin Yan's level, he actually didn't pay much attention to the events of the past 2 days. The accounts couldn't be traced back to him and the Qin family. He also wouldn't go and provoke the emperor at this time. At this time, he only asked in passing. Qin Feng was just thinking about how to reveal this matter. He really wanted to see the shocked expressions on the faces of his uncles and grandfather. Hearing this, he smiled and said, "Regarding this matter, I'm afraid that uncle will have to repeatedly warn Uncle Feng. Brother Feng has only been an official for 2 years, but his table manners are a bit ugly. If it weren't for me helping him hide it yesterday, Uncle might have heard his name in court today." The Uncle Feng he spoke of was Qin Yan's best friend. If it weren't for him raising his hand yesterday, Uncle Feng's son probably wouldn't have had an easy time today. After he finished speaking, he looked at Qin Yan and the other uncles with a slight smile. He even looked at Qin Yu with an obscure gaze. Although his words were a bit tactful, it wasn't hard to guess that the storm that engulfed the entire capital in the past 2 days was caused by them. "What do you mean?" Qin Yan frowned as he looked at him. He seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed and he asked, "Could it be that among the people that assisted the Imperial Censor in investigating the accounts, you were one of them?" Seeing the shocked expressions on the faces of his uncles, including his father, Qin Feng felt extremely carefree in his heart and slightly nodded his head. It was me. Idiot. Qin Yu raised his head and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. He glanced at Qin Feng and curled his lips as he spoke. The Qin family's fifth master turned his head and looked at him a few more times. He patted his shoulder, sighed, and turned to leave. Chapter 606. Why? I'm doing things for His Majesty and the Imperial Court. What did I do wrong? Qin Feng stood up with a flushed face and looked angrily at the family elders. Fool, is this something you can interfere with? The Qin clan's fourth master, who was also Qin Feng's father, pointed at him and said angrily, Do you know how many courtiers you've offended and how many enemies you've made for our Qin clan? Qin Feng originally thought that he would receive praise from everyone, but he didn't expect to be reprimanded instead. Qin Feng's heart was filled with anger. The Qin clan was Qin Yu's Qin clan, not his Qin clan. His future had to be fought for by himself. This was his opportunity, an opportunity that he couldn't obtain in the clan. He looked straight at his father and said loudly, This is an order from His Majesty. What does it have to do with the Qin clan? The situation in the imperial court is very complicated. Do you really think this matter is as simple as an audit? Qin Yan looked at him and said in a deep voice, Your investigation has directly pushed our Qin clan to the opposing side of all the courtiers. Also, the Qin clan, the Chui clan, the Xing clan. You've caused a great disaster this time. Qin Yan's face was incomparably gloomy. This disaster not only implicated their clans, but also the king of Shu behind them. Li Yi's method of killing with a borrowed knife was too sinister. Qin Xiang, who was sitting at the head of the table, stood up and said slowly, There's no need to go to the academy tomorrow. You're not allowed to interfere in this matter. Qin Feng's face was filled with dissatisfaction. Just as he was about to speak, a Qin family servant rushed in from outside and said, Not good, the Qin family's Li Sen, young Master Li Sen was poisoned to death when he was eating at Drunken Moon restaurant. When everyone in the hall heard this, their expressions changed. Qin Feng was stunned for a moment and looked over in disbelief. Qin clan's Qin Li Sen was eating with friends at Drunken Moon restaurant. After eating and drinking, he walked out of Drunken Moon restaurant. After a few steps, he collapsed, foaming at the mouth and his face turned green. Not long after, he lost consciousness. Fortunately, there was a clinic nearby. After he was carried in, they immediately diagnosed that he had been poisoned. They tried several methods to detoxify the poison, but to no avail. In the end, they pinched his mouth and forced 2 liters of feces into his mouth. After vomiting for a while, he finally woke up. Chen, who had finally woken up, fainted again when he saw the filthy scene in front of him. He was still unconscious until now. After the incident, everyone in Drunken Moon Tower, from the shopkeeper to the waiters and cooks, were captured. However, several hours had passed, and the government still did not get any useful information from their mouths. They only knew that a new chef had been recruited yesterday. After the incident, there was no more news about that chef, as if he had completely disappeared from the world. Just a few days ago, the son of the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Rights was poisoned to death. This matter had not been completely settled yet, and now another son of the Qin clan had been poisoned. Just as everyone was wondering if the mastermind behind the scenes was making another move, another matter came out. The second son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works, Li Jianren, had carelessly fallen down the stairs while visiting a brothel. One of his legs had been broken, and he was still lying unconscious in his home. The palace had just sent an imperial doctor over, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. If this matter did not attract the attention of the people, then when Cui Shixin of the Chui clan was almost run over by a speeding carriage on the street, no matter how slow the people's reactions were, they should have known that something important had happened. How is it? In the Qin clan, Qin Yan walked up and asked when he saw his third son return. The middle-aged man walked over and said, the Qin clan has already gone over. Li Sen has already woken up, but he has been vomiting non-stop. The Qin clan was worried that something had happened to him, so they had someone knock him unconscious. What about the Li clan? Qin Yan asked again. The middle-aged man opened his mouth and said, Li Jianren, the imperial doctor said that if he can wake up tomorrow, he will be fine. Qin Yan's eyebrows jumped. Then what if he doesn't wake up? If he doesn't wake up? The middle-aged man sighed and said, then he will never wake up again. The Li clan is in a mess right now. His Majesty has sent out the imperial guards. The brothel has already been surrounded by people, and no one is allowed to enter or leave. Cui Shixin is still fine. He was pushed by the servants beside him, and only suffered superficial wounds. The middle-aged man's face was gloomy as he said, those people, they are too bold. His Majesty has said that if they embezzle more than 30,000 taels of silver, their heads will be left behind. Qin Yan slowly opened his mouth and said, if they don't do this, what awaits them is also death. Chen Lisan was poisoned, Li Jianren's life and death were unknown, and Cui Shixin was almost run over by a carriage on the street. Behind the two of them, Qin Feng stood there, his lips pale, his body trembling, and waves of dizziness assailed him. Qin Yan turned his head to look at him and asked, now, do you know what stupid things you have done? Thump. Qin Feng's legs went soft, and he knelt down. Chen Lisan, Cui Shixin, Li Jianren, the three famous hedonistic young masters of the capital met with misfortune at the same time. After the authorities got involved in the investigation, they naturally dug out many details that people didn't know. For example, they were all students of the Mathematics Academy. Another example was that they all participated in helping the Imperial Censorate investigate the accounts. After knowing this information, the matter couldn't be any more obvious. Revenge, or perhaps it was intimidation, or threats. In a short period of a few days, many officials in the capital were sent to prison by them. Those who should be confiscated had their houses confiscated, and those who should be beheaded were beheaded. Some people had no future, and some people lost their lives. How could matters in the officialdom be so simple? The officials were divided into factions, and pulling one hair could affect the whole body. Perhaps, the person who was sent to prison was an important chess piece that one of the factions had painstakingly laid out. It was because of their interference that many years of hard work had gone down the drain. Of course, this was also a possibility, but no faction in the court would have the guts to offend the Cui and Qin families at the same time. To be able to do such a crazy thing, it was more likely that they were greedy people hidden among the court officials. Once they were found out, they would definitely die. Under such circumstances, it was not surprising that they would stake everything on one throw and do such an irrational thing. With such a terrible thing happening in the capital, the news naturally spread quickly to the palace. It was said that when the emperor found out about this, he was furious and immediately ordered the Secret Intelligence Bureau to investigate the case. At the same time, he urged the Imperial Censorate to speed up the investigation without any delay. After all, everyone knew that if the investigation continued like this, the mastermind behind the scenes would have nowhere to hide. At some point, thick, dark clouds had already enveloped the entire capital. At this time, a few more pieces of news came out, causing the whole matter to fall into a deadlock. After Chen Lisan was poisoned, Li Jianren was seriously injured, and Cui Shixin fell ill due to fear. Qin Feng of the Qin family accidentally caught a cold. He had a high fever and was bedridden. Xing Zijin of the Xing family scalded his feet with hot water and could not walk. The third young master of the Feng family was suffering from hysteria, and the fifth young master of the Han family had a seizure. In short, in one night, 11 students from the Mathematics Academy who were assisting the Imperial Censorate in investigating the accounts fell ill and were injured. The injuries were very sudden, and the illness was very clever. It was not life-threatening, but it was likely that they would have to recuperate at home for a long time. Chapter 607. Qin Feng lay on the bed, his face pale. Although the weather was much better than the cold winter, standing naked outside in the middle of the night was still extremely painful. Why? I don't believe that those people are so daring. His Majesty will definitely send more guards to protect us. I don't understand. He gritted his teeth and said with a trembling voice, "This country belongs to His Majesty. Disobeying the Emperor's orders is simply a dead end." Qin Feng's father, Qin Lang, stood beside the bed and looked at him. He said indifferently, "Feng, do you know where you are worse than Qin Yu?" As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Feng suddenly raised his head. Qin Lang looked at him and said, "You want to be valued by His Majesty. This is not wrong. If it was 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, I wouldn't have stopped you. But now, how long can this country stay in His Majesty's hands? Could it be?" Qin Feng's expression changed. Before this, his father had never told him about these things. Qin Lang looked at his pale son and sighed. He said slowly, "After this incident, you should obediently stay in the mathematics school. When the time is right, you will naturally have a bright future. Don't do these things anymore. Does it still hurt?" Xing Zijian's feet were wrapped in a thick white cloth. A luxuriously dressed woman walked in and asked with a worried face. Xing Zijian gritted his teeth and said, "No, it doesn't hurt anymore." "How can it not hurt when it's boiling water?" A middle-aged man walked in from outside the door. He coldly snorted and said, "Making you unable to get off the ground for 2 months is already very light. Otherwise, you will end up like the two from the Chen and Li families." Thinking of Chen Lisin and Li Jianren, Xing Zijian lowered his head and a trace of fear appeared on his face. Feng family. The current head of the Feng family warned his third son, "Remember, you are suffering from hysteria. Without my permission, your hysteria cannot be cured. Forget it, don't go to the mathematics school for the time being." In the Han clan, a young man said with a bitter expression, "Father, why did you say that I'm suffering from horse fever? Even if it's hysteria, it's fine. Horse fever. How am I supposed to live in the future?" The head of the Han clan snorted coldly and said, "Your hysteria has been used by the Feng clan. You just have to bear with it. It's better to be cured immediately than to die. For the next few days, you should also stay at home due to your illness. Forget about going to the academy, lest you end up like those other families. Tomorrow, I'll send someone to the Divination Academy. Tell them that you're seriously ill and that you should stay at home for half a month." Similar conversations took place in the homes of many influential officials. Every family that had children studying at the Mathematics Academy gave their children a series of reminders. He was absolutely not allowed to participate in the imperial court's investigation of the accounts. What happened to the Qin family, the Li family, and the Cui family was a warning. The other families used self-harm to quickly extricate themselves from this matter. Other than the imperial family and the imperial censors, who valued their reputation more than their lives, no one else was willing to get involved in this matter. This chaos was only the beginning. They could only hope that His Majesty could end it as soon as possible. Otherwise, no one knew how chaotic the capital would become. Is there no one willing to continue investigating? In the Hall of Diligent Government, Emperor Jing held a memorial presented by the imperial censor. He narrowed his eyes and tapped the table with his index finger. Changde walked in from outside and said, "Chen Lisin of the Qin family was indeed poisoned." The son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works was pushed down from upstairs. As for the others, I'm afraid they deliberately did it to avoid trouble. I'm afraid the person behind this is an important official that I rely on. Emperor Jing sighed and said, Changde, you have followed me for so many years. Tell me, was I really wrong this time? A gloomy expression appeared on Changde's face. He said, Your Majesty is naturally not wrong. This old servant also wants to find and kill those vermin who do not do anything. It was a wise decision for Your Majesty to ask County Uncle Li to establish the School of Mathematics. Otherwise, I'm afraid that you will never know that these people exist. Emperor Jing covered his chest and pointed to the thick pile of memorials on the table. He said, Look, these are all memorials to stop investigating the accounts of the officials in the capital. In the court, everyone is in a panic. If I really continue investigating, the court will be in chaos. Changde raised his head but did not say anything. Now that things had reached this point, only His Majesty could make a decision. Emperor Jing rubbed the space between his eyebrows and said, What is Li Yi doing? Today is considered the school's holiday. He is resting at home. Changde replied. Changde thought for a moment and said, What about when the school is not on holiday? Emperor Jing asked again. Changde thought for a moment and said, He is also resting at home, bastard, besides being lazy all day, what else can he do? He actually let Han, an 11-year-old child, take care of such a big school of mathematics. Shaning and Yongning now spend more time with him than in the palace. Emperor Jing's face showed a trace of annoyance. He snorted coldly and said, He really seized the opportunity to use public office for personal gain. The Qin family, the Qin family, the Cui family, the Xing family, this time, he did not let any of them go. I'm afraid he had already expected such a result. County Uncle Li is never willing to suffer losses. Thinking of his speculation a few days ago, Changde nodded slightly. If it were not for the families of those people who came to His Majesty to complain, these people would have all been eliminated on the day of the enrollment of the School of Mathematics. However, they tried their best and even made a certain promise to His Majesty to let these people enter the School of Mathematics. What was the result? It had not even been half a month since the School of Mathematics opened, but several people almost lost their lives because of this. The others did not hesitate to harm their bodies to avoid disaster. If they knew this would happen, why did they do it? Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, Let him enter the palace to see me. Fong said with a face full of amazement, Those people are really ruthless. I heard that the young master of the Qin family was poured with a lot of feces to save his life. There is also that B***tch Li. When he went to the brothel, he almost fell to his death. The rest of the people were also injured and disabled. Yes, they are really ruthless. Li nodded and agreed with his words. He had met Qin Feng and Xing Zijian students many times. They usually looked gentle, but when they attacked, they were really ruthless. They did not even let go of himself. Such people were too dangerous and not worth being friends with. What was more dangerous was the corrupt officials of the Jing kingdom. They were so ruthless. The poor students of the School of Mathematics. If all of them were injured and had to lie at home for a few months, they would definitely fail the final exam. What would they do if they were kicked out of the School of Mathematics by Li Han? Wouldn't this make heroes bleed and cry? How sad, how sad. He really did not expect those corrupt officials to be so crazy. They learned from their mistakes. The students of the School of Mathematics could not be sent out. Otherwise, it would be pushing his students into the fire pit. If he had known that he would have to risk his life to check the accounts, he would have asked the imperial censorate for more money. This time, he had suffered a great loss. Thinking of the silver, Li Yi felt a little heartache. When he saw Chang's face, his heart ached even more. Chapter 608. Your Majesty, Changde's face was stiff. Just as he opened his mouth, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Let's go." Changda's mouth was half open as he froze in place. When he came back to his senses, Li Yi had already walked out the door. "You know that His Majesty wants to summon you into the palace." Li Yi was too lazy to reply to Chang's words. Wasn't it obvious? The old emperor had obviously gone overboard with the investigation of the accounts. He was probably doubting his life right now. Moreover, Changda was the old emperor's personal eunuch and would not easily leave the palace. Under normal circumstances, when he saw Chang, he would most likely summon him into the palace. "Wait here for a while. I'll be right out." At the palace gate, Li Yi got off the carriage and turned his head to speak. Seeing Fang's hesitant expression, he looked at him and asked, "What's the matter? Say it." "Son-in-law, can you bring me in with you this time?" Fang had a troubled expression as he said, "I haven't seen what the palace looks like yet." Li Yi looked at Changda and saw him nod. He had the others wait at the palace gate. He waved at Fang and walked into the palace gate. Fang followed closely behind. Granny Lu looked around as if she was looking at a grand garden. Her gaze lingered on the tall palaces for a long time. "His Majesty is inside. You can go in by yourself." Changda stopped at the entrance of the imperial garden and stopped Fang, who wanted to follow him in. After walking through a bluestone passage that was more than 10 feet long, the familiar pavilion was in front of them. "Sit." In the pavilion, Emperor Jing was not wearing a dragon robe. He was only wearing bright yellow casual clothes. Li Yi looked at the porridge on the table, rubbed his stomach, and said, "Your Majesty, I just ate at home." Even if he had eaten, he still had to eat. It was a good habit to only eat until he was 80% full. He hadn't eaten in the palace for a long time and the imperial chef's skills had improved. "In this matter, did I really do something wrong?" Emperor Jing suddenly asked without rhyme or reason. "What is it?" Li Yi was drinking the soup with a spoon. He thought that it was necessary to go to the catering office and ask how the soup was made. It was sour and sweet, so Rui should like it. Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, "Don't play dumb in front of us." Li Yi put down the spoon, sighed, and said, "His Majesty is not wrong. It is this world that is wrong. Speak human language. It's not wrong for His Majesty to want to get rid of the parasites in the court. However, if there are too many parasites, the entire court will collapse if he wants to get rid of them all. The imperial court cannot collapse." Emperor Jing frowned and asked, "Can we really not investigate any further?" Li Yi drank another mouthful of soup and said, "If we don't investigate, wouldn't it be too easy for them?" "Are you going to investigate or not?" Emperor Jing looked at him and asked. "Investigate." Emperor Jing was about to ask him how to investigate, but Li Yi's tone changed. "Investigate. Whether to investigate or not, it's up to your Majesty to decide." Seeing that the old emperor's breathing was a little short, as if he was about to have an asthma attack, Li Yi hurriedly said, Your Majesty, what's wrong with you?" "Someone, call the imperial doctor. How can we keep the court in order and make them spit out the money they have embezzled?" Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi and said, "I will leave this matter to you." Li Yi almost spat out the soup and said, "Your Majesty, this is too offensive. It will offend all the civil and military officials in the court." Emperor Jing looked at him and asked, "So you want others to offend you?" Someone has to disregard their own interests and do something for the country. If everyone only thinks about themselves, how can the country be strong and how can the people be rich? Li Yi sighed and said, "Your Majesty also knows that I have offended enough people in the court. If I don't bring a few guards with strong martial arts skills, I won't dare to go out. The people's hearts are terrible. Those enemies of mine, whether it's in the open or in the dark, are almost endless. They even use men of sacrifice. They don't even dare to drink tea when they go to someone's residence. The guards at home are a little more powerful than others. If I offend more people, I'm afraid there will be no place for me in the big Jing kingdom. Really? Emperor Jing frowned and asked. Your Majesty, believe it or not, if I walk home from the palace alone, Your Majesty will never see me again. I can't offend them. Li Yi said with a sigh. Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, among the officials in the court, who can't be offended more than you? They should be the ones who should be more worried, right? It was a little unconscionable to say this. He didn't offend anyone at home all day, and people came to climb the wall in the middle of the night. When did he take the initiative to harm others? How did the king of Shu treat him? How did the Chen and Cui families treat him? Assassinations by men of sacrifice, impeachment by the court. They were simply unscrupulous. In the face of ferocious enemies, how did he respond? He helped the king of Shu build momentum and help him win the hearts of the people to fight for the throne. He disregarded the past and allowed the children of his enemies to go to school. He taught them knowledge, gave them meritorious deeds, and gave them a bright future. Who else in the world could disregard the past and repay evil with good? Well, the money in the national treasury was not used for the people. They were all fed to these vermin. I can't swallow this, but I can't continue to investigate like this. It will mess up the court. You have a lot of ideas. Help me with some ideas, and I won't care about you being lazy at home all day. Jing Emperor picked up his chopsticks and began to eat without waiting for his response. It was obvious that he didn't give him a chance to refuse. The atmosphere was slightly awkward. Li Yi once again filled a bowl of soup for himself and looked up at Jing Emperor. The dignified king of a country only cared about money. Last time, he said that he stinked of money. Now it seemed that he was the stinkiest one. Your Majesty, before that, I want to clarify that I am not being lazy at home. Li Yi put down the bowl and said, I am actually. Jing Emperor took out a crispy melon from somewhere and took a bite. He said, what? Haven't you thought of a reason? For a moment, he really couldn't think of a good reason. Li Yi sighed and said, well, Your Majesty, let the intelligence office send all the accounts to the School of Arithmetic. Then send 1,000 imperial guards to surround the School of Arithmetic. 3 days later, will this method work? Jing Emperor put down the milk melon and looked at him. Li Yi took the last milk melon on the table and took a bite. He said, whether it will work or not, we will know after we try it. Then he added, by the way, send the accounts that have been checked over together. Jing Emperor looked at him and asked, why? Li Yi explained, the School of Arithmetic has developed a new and more scientific method of checking accounts. The accounts that have problems in the past must have problems. The accounts that have no problems in the past may not be really good. In that case, let them send it together. Jing Emperor nodded. He stood up and walked outside. Well, I will arrange this matter early. You should also go back and make some preparations. Li Yi looked up at him, Your Majesty, I don't know how to calculate the wages. Jing Emperor narrowed his eyes, what wages? Your Majesty, you also know that the students are risking their lives to check the accounts. We can't. Emperor Jing sat down again and said, well, today I will properly calculate with you the problem of the salary. He looked up. This expression. How is this calculating wages? It is clearly calculating accounts. Your Majesty, go first. Li Yi picked up the spoon again, I will finish this bowl of soup. Chapter 609. Son-in-law, how much do you think it will take to build such a large palace? As the two of them walked out of the palace, Fong pointed to a palace not far away and asked. Li glanced at the palace and said, "No amount of silver will do." "Why?" Fong was startled and quickly asked. "This kind of palace can only be built by the royal family. If others build it, they will be overstepping the rules and will be beheaded." There were many rules in the royal family. There were rules for what kind of person, what kind of carriage, and what kind of house could be built. If one overstepped the rules, others might suspect that one wanted to rebel or something. It was even more foolish than hiding the dragon robe at home. Fong thought for a moment and asked, "Then can we find a place to build it secretly?" "No." Changde, who was walking in front, flatly refused. Fong's budding dream was shattered just like that. The investigation of the account seemed to have really blown up. Although a few students from the School of Mathematics who were assisting the Imperial Censorate couldn't continue the investigation due to their injuries and illnesses, the Emperor's determination to eliminate corrupt officials didn't change at all. The Secret Intelligence Unit moved out that night. From the 6 ministries to the local government, all the accounts were packed and sent to the School of Mathematics. Even the places that had been checked before were checked again. Seeing the accounts being carried away box by box, many officials' hearts raced. This night was destined to be a sleepless night for many officials in the court. At the same time, all the city gates in the capital were suddenly monitored strictly. Every city gate was guarded by no less than 100 imperial guards. They were conducting strict checks on people entering and leaving the city. The atmosphere in the morning court was especially gloomy. Other than a few insignificant reports, all the officials stood in their positions obediently and didn't say a word. As usual, the emperor announced the end of court after asking a few questions. The officials who had left court were no longer talking and laughing as they usually did. They were all in a hurry. When they left the palace, they couldn't help but look in a certain direction. Even the figures of the 1,000 imperial guards at the entrance of the School of Mathematics could still be vaguely recognized. When he raised his head, the clear sky seemed to be covered in thick dark clouds that pressed down on him, making it hard for him to breathe. The Qin family. Fool! Qin Yen slammed the table and said angrily, "It's fine if you didn't think through the pros and cons of this matter and participated in it, but you actually covered up for a criminal. Do you know that the accounts you checked this morning have all been sent back to the School of Divination?" If you're found out that you're covering up for your own friends, that's a crime of deceiving the emperor. Looking at his furious uncle, Qin Feng's already pale face turned even paler. Then, he felt the world spin around him. His vision went black and he lost consciousness. Feng Er, a middle-aged woman's expression changed, and she quickly walked to the bed. "In Kai Feng, there's Justice Bao. He's impartial and incorruptible." In the small garden of the Qin manor, the 5th master of the Qin family drank a little wine. From time to time, he would pinch a bean into his mouth and shake his head. "5th master, what kind of place is Kai Feng?" A big man standing behind him asked in confusion. "It's written in the opera. Who knows where this place is?" The 5th master of the Qin family didn't even raise his head as he said, "In the future, don't doze off in the brothel and ruin 5th master's mood." The big man nodded repeatedly. The 5th master was extremely fond of opera. It was said that his most beloved concubine was an entertainer. Later on, she died for some reason. However, this hobby of the 5th master had never changed. The 5th master of the Qin family suddenly sighed and said, "Feng Er, this child's brain is still too simple. If he becomes an official in the future, I'm afraid he'll be eaten by others until not even his bones remain." After a pause, he continued, "However, I'm afraid he won't have the chance to become an official in the future." The Xing family. "Idiot, look at what stupid things you've done." The head of the Xing family, the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Xing Shichen, slapped his son's face. His expression was exceptionally sinister. "Cover up? Who do you think you are? You still want credit. There's no credit left. Do you know what this is? This is deceiving the emperor. Even losing your head is not enough. Hearing this, beads of sweat rolled down Xing Zijian's forehead. His whole body trembled like a sieve. The Cui family. The Qin family. The Feng family. The Han family. Li Yi. After several officials scolded their sons, they gritted their teeth and spat out these two words. After gnashing his teeth for a while, the anger on his face turned into deep regret. The Academy of Mathematics should not have begged His Majesty to let them in. Half of the children of the aristocratic families are on sick leave. Li Yi put down his book and looked up. A professor from the Mathematics Academy quickly said, "Yes, Sir Dean. Today, there are less than 30 people who returned to the Academy." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Then give the rest of them a few days off. It just so happens that the Academy is busy these few days. They won't be able to help much." As soon as he finished speaking, a general of the Imperial Army walked in from outside. He cupped his hands and said, "Sir Li, all the accounts have been delivered. Thank you for your hard work." Li Yi stood up and said with a smile. The leader of the Imperial Guards was flattered and quickly said, "We are following the Emperor's orders. This is our duty." "Sir Li, you are too kind." At this time, the 66 students from poor families had gathered at the entrance of the Mathematics Academy's classroom. This is your first chance to serve the Imperial Court. What you need to do is to carefully check these accounts. Every time you find a problematic account, you will be able to accumulate 1 credit. This credit will be used for the final evaluation at the end of the semester. Li Han put his hands behind his back and paced in front of the students. He said something loudly and occasionally stopped to look at his palm before continuing to speak. The students from poor families were excited. This was the first time they had a chance to apply what they had learned. Not to mention, they could also obtain credits. They would not have to worry about the final examination and would be able to contribute to the Imperial Court. They had long been eager to give it a try. At this moment, no one held any grudges against the 11 children of the aristocratic families who monopolized this opportunity. Poisoning, pouring feces, breaking a leg, being hit by a carriage. It turned out that going out for an internship was so dangerous. If that was the case, wasn't this the dean's way of protecting the students from poor families? The dean had really put in a lot of effort. Now that they could sit in the Mathematics Academy and be protected by so many Imperial Guards, it was all because of the dean. Even if those corrupt officials wanted to take revenge, they would not be able to do so. Thinking of this, everyone looked at the figure walking over from the side, and their faces were filled with deep gratitude. Time is of the essence. Everyone, keep your spirits up. We must finish checking all the accounts within 3 days. Li Yi walked in front of everyone and looked at them. Are you confident? Yes. Everyone answered in unison. Not long after, the entire Mathematics Academy was filled with the sound of beads colliding with each other. Every official who passed by the School of Mathematics couldn't help but feel depressed. It seemed peaceful outside, but everyone knew that a storm was brewing inside that could engulf the entire Imperial Court. Once the gates of the Mathematics Academy were opened, a terrifying storm would be released. Chapter 610. Bang! Li Yi knocked away Li Xian's East Wind and chose a card. 30,000. 2 days ago, the students of the arithmetic faculty had begun to calculate the accounts nervously. The officials of the Imperial Court were all on edge because of this matter. They couldn't sleep well or eat well. They had lost 5 kilograms in 2 days. As the dean of the arithmetic faculty, if he were to play mahjong in the faculty, it would be a little too much. Fortunately, the school was not far from the palace. Li Xian had been busy in the Academy of Sciences next door. Since the Princess Royal was playing mahjong, they needed one more player. Finally, they called the arrogant Lolita over. Win. The arrogant Lolita pushed down her card wall and smiled. Give me money, give me money. Yongning stood by Li Yi's side. Her heart ached as she passed a copper coin to Li Yi. In just an hour, the copper coin in her hand had been reduced by half. While shuffling the cards, Emingsu looked up at Li Yi and said slowly, "Today, more than 10 officials said they were sick and didn't attend the morning court." The morning court ended in less than a quarter of an hour. She paused and said, "If it drags on for a few more days, I'm afraid half of the people in the court will be gone. We'll know the result tomorrow." Li Yi looked at the cards. They were very good. He casually played a south wind. Now he just needed to wait for 6 or 9 rounds of winning. Win. The arrogant Lolita pushed down the card wall and said with a smile, "Give me money." Mahjong couldn't be played anymore, so they played poker. Li Yi and the arrogant Lolita were on one side, while Li Xian and the princess were on the other. After a while, Yongning's smile became bright. "Father, are you really going to find all the corrupt officials? Play cards well." Look at how professional Li Xian was. The Princess Royal Highness couldn't stop talking about the state affairs. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "How is that possible? If we catch all of them, I'm afraid the entire court will be purged." Mingzhu's expression softened as she asked, "Then why do you still want to check these accounts? You'll know during the morning assembly tomorrow." Li Yi arranged his cards and changed the topic. "How's your matter going?" "Everything is going well." Mingzi nodded her head and said, "According to what you said, a large piece of land has been set up outside the city and a workshop has been built. Most of the farmers near the capital have sent over girls above the age of 13. The textile machines have also been improved. Soon, the clothing shops in the capital will be able to open on a large scale. When the time comes, we'll have to break it down. Clothes for the commoners and those for the nobles and officials have to be separated. For the latter, it'll take 2 more days of work and the craftsmanship will be more exquisite. The price will be 100 times more expensive. Also, send someone to manage the military rations business with the family of generals. You're a princess, so it'll be easier for you to interact with them. No one will gossip about you. I'll just be in charge of collecting money." Li Xian was a little depressed as he asked, "Why can Emingzi do the military rations business, but I can't?" Li Yi glanced at him. Was this guy stupid? Although he was considered half a member of the royal family, he was still the son of a prince. What would the courtiers think if he made such a good relationship with the family of generals and went there every other day? A smile suddenly appeared on Li Xian's face. He didn't mind this matter anymore. He threw out a few cards and said, 3 and 2. I only have 1 card left. I can't afford it. Li Yi waved his hand. 3 2s and 2 3s. He couldn't afford it. And Mingzhu was on his side. Even if he could afford it, he wouldn't want it. Royal bomb. The Tsundra Lolita threw out all the cards in her hand. Straight, we won again, give me money, give me money. When it came to playing cards and chess, there was no more reliable teammate than the Tsundra Lolita. Yongning was busy collecting the money. Li Xian was a little discouraged. He thought of something and asked, Mingzhu, your birthday is coming soon. What present do you want this year? This kind of question was wrong. Who would directly ask others what present they wanted? When the time came, they could directly give others a few million taels of silver. It would definitely be more shocking than any present. The Tsundra Lolita raised her head to look at Li Yi and asked, Sir, what present do you intend to give my royal sister? My birthday is coming soon. Your present can't be worse than my royal sister's. It's a secret for now. Li Yi actually didn't know when Mingzhu's birthday was. However, it was just in time this time. He should be able to prepare it soon. My birthday is the same as Mingzhu's. Li Xian turned to look at Li Yi with a meaningful gaze. Li Yi cupped his hands at him. Happy birthday. The second day, it's already the second day. In an official's mansion in the capital, a middle-aged man was anxiously pacing in the courtyard. There were a few blisters on his mouth. Master, are you still not going to the court tomorrow? A woman walked out of the house and said worriedly. The middle-aged man waved his hand impatiently and said, No, I'm not going. Just say that I'm sick, very sick. As soon as he finished speaking, a servant came forward and reported, Master, people from the palace have come. The middle-aged man's face immediately turned pale. His legs went soft and he asked with a trembling voice, Come. How many came? 1. The servant said, Master, do you want to see him? No, no. Go ask him what's the matter. The middle-aged man waved his hand and quickly walked to the bed in the room to lie down. He used 2 pieces of old ginger to wipe his face. He immediately looked much weaker. Not long after, the servant came in from outside. Left? The middle-aged man asked. The servant replied, He left. The middle-aged man got up from the bed and asked, What did he say? The eunuch from the palace said that His Majesty has something important to announce in the morning court tomorrow and cannot ask for leave. Even if his life is hanging by a thread, he must be carried to the Golden Hall. The middle-aged man's vision turned black and he weakly fell onto the bed. At different times, there were many officials who also felt that their vision was turning black. In the past few days, almost half of the officials in the court had been gone. It seemed that they had all contracted some kind of acute illness overnight. They were so sick that they could not even go to court and could only rest at home. His Majesty did not say much about this. It seemed that nothing had happened in the past 2 days. There was nothing unusual in the court. However, on the second day, he sent a eunuch to inform those officials who were sick that they were not allowed to ask for leave in the morning court. The message was very clear. Even if they were to die, they had to die in the court. Everyone knew that all the accounts sent to the mathematics school would be settled the next day. Next, it was time for His Majesty to settle the accounts with them. The various city gates of the capital had been tightly guarded by the imperial guards. It was easy to enter the capital but difficult to leave. Furthermore, the vicinity of the homes of the officials in the court had probably already been closely watched by the secret intelligence unit. If they made any abnormal movements, the secret intelligence unit would immediately come to their manors to ask for a cup of tea. Li Yi was not worried that there would be people in the capital who would not be able to sleep that night. He was also not worried that their bodies would not be able to take it after not sleeping well for many days. He looked at the oval glass bead that Fong handed over. There were almost no bubbles inside. Although there was still a bit of color, it did not affect it much. In the past month, after many improvements in equipment and craftsmanship, he had finally pushed it to this step. He could finally use it to swindle money. He could finally use it to benefit the vast number of women in the capital. If we improve the craftsmanship, it will be even easier to swindle money. Li Yi handed the glass bead to Fong and reminded him again. At the same time, a carriage loaded with boxes drove out of the mathematics school and straight into the palace gates. Chapter 6:11. Going to morning court was a very troublesome matter. Usually, one could lie in bed until 8 o'clock. If one wanted to go to court, one had to wake up at 6 o'clock. Li Yi had never been interested in going to court. Unfortunately, the old emperor had announced yesterday that he could not be absent from today's morning court. Whoever asked for leave would be recorded in a small booklet. It was said that a minister who was seriously ill was brought into the palace by eunuchs. At this moment, he was sitting on the chair in front. Waking up late would ruin the morning, and waking up early would ruin the day. The consequence of waking up early was that he had to lean against General Shua's pillar for a while. He missed the bed and the dew hole. There was still some time before the morning court began. If he had known earlier, he would have gone to the eldest princess's place to lie down. Boy, don't stand out during the morning court. This matter is not something you can interfere with. General Shua patted his shoulder and warned him. Li Yi yawned and opened his eyes. Don't worry, old Shua. I won't say a word today. I'll just lean against here and wait for the court to end. I'm serious this time. General Shua frowned and said, this time, His Majesty asked the divination school to investigate the accounts. Although you are not to be blamed, don't expect the court officials to remember your good deeds. This matter has become too big. Don't get yourself into any more trouble. I know. Li Yi said seriously and continued to lean against the pillar to nap. Today's morning court session was a one-man show for the old emperor. No one could interrupt him. In the Golden Hall, other than a certain person leaning against the pillar and a few ministers who were given a seat because of their health, all the court officials stood quietly in their seats. Some had sallow faces and some had sunken eyes. It was obvious that they had not lived well these past few days. There were even some who seemed to have been sucked out of their spirits. They were extremely dispirited and looked up from time to time with eyes full of fear. Emperor Jing arrived an hour later than the appointed morning court time. It was not until Li Yi had caught up on his sleep that he saw him slowly walking out from the back of the hall accompanied by Changde. Greetings, Your Majesty. Emperor Jing sat on the dragon throne and the court officials bowed. Hundreds of people spoke in unison. No need for formalities. Emperor Jing raised his hand. There was no special expression on his face as he said, "Does anyone have anything to report today?" It was silent below. Everyone knew that the accounts had been checked and the emperor would definitely fly into a rage at the morning court. Many officials in the court would not be able to safely hang their heads on their necks. However, at this moment, the emperor's calm attitude was really puzzling. Before figuring out the situation, who would dare to speak at this time? At this moment, an imperial censor stood up, bowed, and said, "Your Majesty, I accuse Chen Lisin, Qin Feng, and Cui Shixin of the Divination Academy of abusing their authority for personal gain. They relied on Your Majesty's trust to deliberately cover up the guilty officials during the accounts investigation a few days ago, disrupting the public's view, and attempting to deceive Your Majesty." As soon as these words came out, several people in the court immediately became gloomy. However, many people were slightly stunned. They knew that Chen Lisin, Qin Feng, Cui Shixin, and the others had helped the imperial censor to investigate the accounts. They were the ones who had uncovered the corrupt officials that His Majesty had dealt with previously. However, they only knew about this matter and did not know that these people had actually done something to cover up. These playboys were really bold and presumptuous. Did they really think that they could do whatever they wanted just because they had families behind them? It should be known that if this matter was investigated further, it would be a crime punishable by death. The crime of deceiving Your Majesty was a crime that could not be punished. The imperial censor named Chen Lisin and the others and then singled out the officials who had been covered up one by one. Many people in the court began to have strange expressions on their faces. This was really covering up. They had actually let off all the officials who were in the King of Shu's faction, but not a single one of the other factions had been left out. These playboys were even more daring than the elders and their families. At this moment, an official stood up and said, "Your Majesty, Cui Shixin and the others are only students of the college and not officials of the imperial court. They were working for the imperial court and were plotted against by villains. Regardless of what happened, they did not deserve to die. although this official was also in the King of Shu's faction, he did not belong to the families behind these 11 people. He also had no connection with the officials who had been covered up. At this moment, only he could stand up and speak for these 11 people. Please show mercy, Your Majesty. Please show mercy, Your Majesty. After the imperial censor finished speaking, several more people stood up to plead for mercy for these people. There was only one reason, and that was to prevent this matter from being classified as deceiving the emperor. Otherwise, not a single one of these people would be able to escape. In fact, there were even 2 families with small numbers of people who would not be able to continue. Although the 11 of them have done meritorious deeds, their merits do not make up for their mistakes. They have sacrificed their work for personal reasons and covered up for their friends. Since they are not officials of the imperial court, from today onwards, these 11 people will be expelled from the College of Divination. The imperial court will never hire them again. Emperor Jing finally spoke, which made many people feel relieved. Never hiring them meant that they could only be playboys waiting to die in the future. They would never be able to enter the imperial court as officials. Although this result was still cruel, at least they could keep their lives. For big families like the Chui family, the Qin family, and the Qin family, the future of a collateral descendant was not a big deal. Of course, it was different for Lord Sing of the Ministry of Revenue. If he could not give birth to an outstanding son with his wife, the Xing family, which had struggled so hard to climb up, would end with his generation. Chui Yuncan, the county magistrate of Wang County, Qin Qing, Tian of the Department of Granaries. Emperor Jing named the names of the officials who were covered up by them one by one and said in a low voice, "Order the intelligence department to arrest these people and bring them back to the Ministry of Justice within 1 day." Not only did they not cover up the officials, but they also got themselves involved. The King of Shu's faction was really unlucky these days. If the King of Shu could return to the capital one day, who knew how many officials loyal to him would be left? Does anyone have anything else to report to the emperor? After a series of orders, Emperor Jing sat back on the dragon throne and asked everyone. Naturally, no one said anything. At the same time, many people had a glimmer of hope in their hearts. If no one else reported to the emperor, then, would today's morning court session end here? If so, didn't it mean that the emperor would let bygones be bygones? Thinking about it, this case involved a wide range of people and almost covered the entire imperial court. How could the emperor arrest everyone? If so, how many officials would be able to stand here tomorrow? Many people secretly breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. They should have thought of it earlier, the law did not punish the masses. Although the current situation of the Jing kingdom could not be considered as having internal and external troubles, it was not very good either. Moreover, the emperor's body could not hold on for too long. According to the emperor's character, the most important thing was to ensure the stability of the imperial court. How could he do such a radical thing at this time? This time, he probably just wanted to arrest a few examples to deter them. Unfortunately, this lucky thing happened to the officials of the King of Shu's faction. These days, they really should not have been so worried, since everyone has nothing to say. Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne and said, "Then, let me say a few words." His face suddenly darkened and he said coldly, "Come, arrest the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Chen Bo, the Left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Feng Yuan, the Director of the Du Branch, Ha Ning, for me." Emperor Jing called out a total of nearly 10 people's names. In the crowd, these people, who had just relaxed, suddenly tensed up. They looked up and their faces instantly turned pale. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.